Just to test this. Dragi učesnici, të nderuar pjesëmarrës, and dear participants, welcome to the 18th edition of the International Annual Conference e-Society.mk, organized by Metamorphosis Foundation, this year in a hybrid format between the 6th and 7th of December. This year's conference edition is focusing on the topic of cyber resilience for freedom and security. We managed to provide the opportunity for participants to come here and join us live to hear the discussions in Hotel Marriott, but also via Zoom and Facebook Live on the Metamorphosis Facebook page. Before we officially start off the conference, just a couple of housekeeping rules so that the participants who follow the event have a much pleasanter experience. Translation is available within the venue. In the back, you have headphones, which you can use for the translation, and the channels are 1 for Macedonian, 2 for English, 3 for the Albanian channel. Also, translation is available via Zoom in the interpretation icon, which you can locate at the bottom taskbar. Please have in mind that this event is being recorded and streamed live on Facebook. As the conference is an interactive event and we would like our participants to interact, of course, with the audience and the speakers, you will be able to pose your questions after the panel discussions are over via Zoom in the chat, but also here, our colleagues have microphones with them, so you will just be able to raise your hand and get the microphone. Please have in mind that Zoom is limited to 300 people, so in case you cannot join in, Facebook Live is also provided. A little bit about our supporters for this year's conference. This year's edition of the e-Society conference is organized in synergy with a couple of projects and our supporters, among which increasing civic engagement in the digital agenda, or ICEDA, financed by the European Union, Western Balkan Anti-Disinformation Hub, financed by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Kingdom of Netherlands, promoting access to reliable news to counter disinformation, financed by the National Endowment for Democracy, Credible News for Empowered Youth, supported and financed by the UK Aid through the British Embassy Skopje, as well as the project Good Governance and Cybersecurity in the Western Balkans, implemented by DCAV, Geneva Center for Security Sector Governance, and financed by the UK government's Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office. Without any further ado, it is my great honor to kindly ask the head of the EU delegation, Mr. David Geer, to start off the conference.
Very deep chairs. Thank you very much. Dear Excellencies, dear State Secretary, dear ladies and gentlemen. Mi przedstawiła ogromne zadowoljstvo da otvoram ušte jedno izdanje na međunarodna konferencija i občtestvo v Skopje. Čestitki do Fondacija za Metamorphosis, koja go organizira ovaj forum po 18. pat. Kako platforma za debata za važni aspekti od i občestvota, kako je što ekipe otpornosti, koja je tema za ova godina.
Truly uncomfortable chairs. Apologies.
So let me start with a few statistics. It's been estimated that cybercrime costs the global economy annually something in the order of $1 trillion, or a little short of 1% of global GDP. The average cost of a data breach in 2021 was calculated as $4.2 million. The infamous WannaCry cyber attack is estimated to have cost $4 billion. And the Petya malware attack initially against Ukraine in 2017, some $10 billion. And that's without calculating the cost in terms of security and possibly even human lives. And if ever there was any doubt that cyber is now an instrument of warfare, one only has to look at Ukraine to see how Russia has used cyber attacks, initially to inspire fear. Think of the attacks from the 14th of January this year, which targeted over 70 websites in Ukraine, defacing them with messages in Ukrainian, Russian, and apparently bad Polish. Be afraid and wait for the worst. And later, of course, the attacks on infrastructure and public services through cyber. And so we live today in a profoundly changed world, one in which there is no room for naivety or innocence, one in which hybrid threats, including cyber in particular, have to be part of our calculation of risk and national security. Joint institutional and civilian efforts are therefore needed to build resilience at the level of the state, with industry, in the private sector, and with the general public. Here in North Macedonia, we have already witnessed cyber attacks, such as those that took place on polling day back on the 15th of July, 2020, and much more recently, incidents involving the Ministries of Education and Agriculture, or even St. Kirill and Methodius University, just to name a few. Now, as you know, the European Commission produces every year a country report which assesses the country's progress in reforms. It also provides some analysis of the current situation and contains some recommendations as to how the country can become more resilient to cyber threats. For example, it reports that over 100 computer crimes were detected in 2020, for which 88 perpetrators were alleged perpetrators were criminally charged. And noting that such incidents continued in 2021, it called on the state authorities to prepare the necessary legislation on cybersecurity and set up a coordinated and unified system to tackle cybercrime. And I think coordination and unity of approach is a theme throughout this issue. Regrettably, North Macedonia is still seriously lagging behind in its preparedness for facing cyber threats. As you will be aware, a national cyber security strategy and action plan exist, covering the period 2018 to 2022. Implementation of these has accelerated in the past year. However, it has a number of weaknesses. Its substance is generic and leaves out some fundamental cybersecurity aspects, such as the sufficiency of existing legislation, the identification of competent authorities, establishment of a practical cooperation framework, and of the identification of critical information infrastructure. Similarly, it lacks performance indicators to measure success, but most importantly of all, the two key implementing bodies, the National Cybersecurity Council and the Operational Implementation Body, have never been fully operational. Consequently, the strategy's implementation has been limited, fragmented, and uncoordinated. And there's also a need to ensure consistency with the national strategy on building resilience and confronting hybrid threats, which was adopted in October last year and covers the period up to 2025. And of course, there are many other issues which affect resilience and which we find in many countries around the world, including the understaffing of institutions. We know this is a notoriously difficult issue to address here and elsewhere, given the competitiveness of the digital skills market. As a result, the websites and databases of most institutions remain poorly maintained and vulnerable to attack. The country also lacks official cybersecurity cooperation formats with the private sector and civil society organization. And existing informal public-private consultations still tend to be somewhat unstructured, irregular, and ad hoc. And there is an opportunity and a need for North Macedonia particularly its domestic institutions, to participate more actively in European networks such as the European Union Agency for Cybersecurity and the Computer Security Incident Response Team Network. All of these issues need to be addressed urgently as the country prepares its new cybersecurity strategy under the leadership of the Ministry for Information Society and Administration. But there is good news. As you'll be aware, since July 2022, EU membership negotiations have been launched with North Macedonia. This provides enormous opportunities in many sectors, but in the context of cyber, it offers a route through the screening process and beyond to upgrade cyber capacities and improve preparedness. And of course, this is a very fast moving area. Let me just give you a few examples of some of the new initiatives at the European level in this field. In 2020, the European Commission and the High Representative Borrell presented a new EU cybersecurity strategy aimed at improving the security of essential services by focusing on building collective capacity. At the same time, cross-border security is being enhanced through the implementation of the Directive on the Security of Network and Information Systems in the EU, but needs to be implemented here. Numerous tools and support packages have been made available recently, from a 5G EU toolbox through to a joint diplomatic response to malicious cyber activities, the so-called cyber diplomacy toolbox. Already a second directive is under discussion, as is work on the security of IT products and services through a system of certification. Cybersecurity is also an important element of the digital agenda for the Western Balkans, launched back in 2018. And as recently as the 10th of November this year, the European Commission and the High Representative launched a communication, that's short for a policy statement with proposals on cyber defense, which is designed to increase cooperation and investments in cyber defense. And I'm sure that we will hear more on this issue as leaders from the European Union and the Western Balkans meet in Tirana today. This country needs to keep abreast with these developments and be part of the discussions in which important policy decisions are being made, which will affect all of us and will shape our collective cyber resilience and defense for the future. I therefore very much welcome this initiative today and wish you another successful event. Vi blagodaram, Faleminderit.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Next, it is my great honor to invite Mr. Dirk-Jan Kop, the Ambassador of the Kingdom of Netherlands to North Macedonia, to also give his speech.
Cyber has me at the edge of my seat as well. Thank you very much. Dear Secretary General Anchev, right? Dear Director Yashari, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor to provide the opening remarks at the 18th edition of the International e-Society Conference, Cyber Resilience for Freedom and Security, organized by the Metamorphosis Foundation. The interests of the Netherlands in North Macedonia are simple: stability and prosperity, and that is why we want this country to be both in NATO, which has been achieved, and in the EU, which it could achieve in the near future. However, nowadays we cannot talk about security and stability if we don't also work on keeping the cyberspace open, free, stable, and secure. Cybersecurity, in my opinion, but also in the opinion of the Minister of Defense of North Macedonia, who sadly cannot be here today, figures at the top of the security concerns of North Macedonia. The Dutch approach to cybersecurity relies on promoting consolidated rules in cyberspace, exposing and stopping those who break the rules, but also working together and assisting other countries in upgrading their resilience. Malign actors take a particular interest in this region and don't shy away from using cyber attacks or disinformation to exert their influence. High susceptibility in this country to conspiracy theories also provides fertile ground for spreading disinformation. That is why we are at the moment in synergy with this event, financing the Metamorphosis Foundation in implementing one of the largest regional projects for exposing and combating foreign malign influence through investigative journalism. At the same time, the best way to deal with such threats is to decrease our own vulnerabilities and build a resilient society. In order to promote international cooperation, back in 2015, the Netherlands established the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise, the GFCE, as a platform where governments can learn from each other and use expertise from the private sector and civil society. I'm very pleased that just a few weeks ago, North Macedonia became the 103rd member of GFCE, and I congratulate the country for that. This accession of North Macedonia came as a follow-up to the Western Balkans cyber policy dialogue, which took place first online in 2021 and then in person in Skopje in June of this year. Through these two conferences, we partnered with the Ministry of Defense of North Macedonia and with civil society, trying to find ways to strengthen trust in key areas and address 4 critical challenges facing the Western Balkans: cyber defense, cyber resilience, cyber crime, and information disorder. And I might add that if you are involved, as we all are, in cyber warfare, it doesn't only mean cyber defense. You have to start looking into cyber attack as well. Cybersecurity is a shared responsibility where interinstitutional cooperation is of utmost importance. I know how hard this is for North Macedonia, but politics shouldn't play a role. Cyber needs to be handled by professionals in an efficient framework established by all concerned ministries and other government institutions and agencies. This is why the Netherlands proudly supported 2 candidates from North Macedonia to take part in the Women in International Security and Cyberspace Fellowship, which aims to ensure equal and effective representation of female diplomats from all regions in United Nations cyber negotiations. You have an excellent program over the next 2 days with prominent national and international speakers, and I challenge you to think not only about pointing out problems, but also work together on exploring and creating systemic solutions. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Next, it is my great honor to invite the Ambassador of the United Kingdom in North Macedonia, Mr. Matthew Lawson, for his opening remarks.
Thank you very much, dear colleagues, State Secretary, dear guests. I'll slip forward in my chair. It's always a tough gig to go third after 2 distinguished speakers. So in an effort to keep it interesting and engaged, I will give you a brief overview of the UK's experience on cyber. But I think in balancing throughout your conference, the fine balance which all of our jurisdictions and countries have between freedom and security, you're going to have to bear in mind 3 straightforward questions. Who owns the internet? Think about that one. Who uses the internet? And who regulates the internet? The answers to those 3 questions are not straightforward, and therefore defining the balance between freedom and security on the internet and the use of the internet is an incredibly difficult and challenging task. I think you've got an excellent 2-day program. Delighted that you're partnering with the Metamorphosis Foundation, who we partner with, and also with DCAF, who we also partner with to help answer those questions. But they are fundamental questions, and certainly questions that the UK itself is asking itself through its legislation and through its program activity. To follow on from Ambassador Gear, a few statistics on the scale of the issue. Across the world, there are 2 billion internet users and 5 billion mobile phone connections. Every day, we send 294 billion emails, 5 billion SMS messages. Every minute, we post 35 hours of video to YouTube. 3,000 photos to Flickr, and nearly 35,000 tweets. Only a couple of those will be from the British Embassy here. Over 91% of UK businesses and 73% of UK households have internet access, and 47.2 billion was spent online in the UK alone last year. It's an incredible set of statistics. As you know, because you're here to debate it, our society is now almost entirely dependent on the continued availability, accuracy, and confidentiality of its information and communications technology. We need it for our economic health, for a domestic machinery of government, for national defense, and our day-to-day social and cultural existence. Despite the technology's obvious benefits, the seeds of criminality planted by the first computer hackers 20 years ago have allowed old crimes to be committed in new and more subtle ways. The information generated by the technology is also a target of considerable interest for individuals, groups, and organizations and nation states, as Ambassador Koch pointed out, with more malign intent. And the level of concern expressed by some commentators suggests that cybercrime is a problem of considerable magnitude. And certainly the UK government, in our recent considers it so in its national security strategy. We recognise tier 1 risks. Cyber threat announced and in our programme £650 million of investment in a national cybersecurity programme, and this follows on from the establishment, as you probably know, of our National Cybersecurity Centre in 2015. The costs of cybercrime absolutely enormous. Last year, a recent report, which you can find online, the cost of cybercrime produced by the UK government, estimated the cost to the UK at £27 billion per year. Incredible figure. In the UK's case, a significant proportion of this cost comes from the threat of IP from UK businesses, which the UK government estimates at a huge 9.2 billion per annum. The real impact of cybercrime is likely to be much greater. And the main loser of this, in the UK's case, is actually UK business, which suffers from high-level intellectual property, theft, and espionage. I can talk a little bit about the areas in which that happens, if you like, after take questions. Here in North Macedonia, you have, of course, and I suspect the State Secretary might talk a little bit about this, a pattern of cyber attacks. We've all heard about several of them, the attacks in February, the National Bank and other banks in North Macedonia, attacks on the MFA, and attacks on the Ministries of Education and Agriculture. This is why it's really important that the UK government, together with our partners, is supporting work to combat cybercrime. We've set up recently, as the UK government across the world, a network of cyber achieving scholars, of which I'm very pleased to say that 5 have just returned back to North Macedonia from their studies in the UK. We're also working together with DCAF on a program on good governance in cybersecurity, and we've just signed, together with our partners in USAID, a new program on cybersecurity and resilience. So we're actively engaged in the space. We work very much together with our partners across the international community and in government. But the questions that I set at the beginning remain fundamental questions for not only for North Macedonia, but for all of us in terms of designing programs, in terms of designing our national responses in our national jurisdictions, and also setting international norms. So I think in that context, I welcome and really hope that you have a very useful conference. I certainly would be very interested in hearing the results of the conference as we go through the next couple of days. And I think my colleague from the UK Embassy is part of a panel on the second day, so I hope we will continue to actively participate and share ideas in it. I hope that gives you a bit of a context setting for what I hope will be an interesting and informative day. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Now, unfortunately, we weren't able to get here live with us the Deputy Prime Minister in charge of policies for good governance, Ms. Slavica Grgovska. However, she did send us a video yesterday that I suggest that we go through it now.
Почитувани присутни, кога зборуваме за е-општество или пак за дигитална трансформација на општеството, неопходно е тој процес да биде сеопфатен, да се обезбеди целосен консенсус, а со тоа да се обезбеди и континуитет. Оваа конференција на која има учесници од сите профили, експерти, носители на одлуки, представници на граѓанскиот сектор, е одлична прилика уште еднаш да потенцирам дека дигиталната трансформација на општеството е долг процес. Не е политички, не е партиски, туку општествен процес за кој е неопходно да се обезбеди континуитет и одржливост, бидејќи сите сме свесни дека тоа е процес кој не може да се заврши во еден политички мандат. Од таа причина на моја иницијатива, владата го формираше Националниот совет за дигитална трансформација на општеството, со кој јас председавам, а во кој покрај министрите за информатичко општество и администрација, за внатрешни работи, за финансии и за одбрана, присутни се и представници од Агенцијата за електронски комуникации, ЗЕЛС, председателите на собраниските комисии за транспорт и за финансирање и буџет, со кои по правило председава опозицијата, представници од стопанските комори, научната заедница која работи на создавање на IT кадри, Македонската банкарска асоциација и други. Длабоко сум убедена дека овој пристап гарантира одржливост и континуитет на процесот, затоа што возможува креирање консензус за се што е потребно да создадеме дигитално општество. Секако предуслов за ефикасна дигитална трансформација на општеството е воспоставување на електронската лична карта, која обезбедува електронска идентификација и електронски подпис, а услугите може да се користат со еден акаунт. И на тоа бевме фокусирани во изминатиот период, а ќе бидеме фокусирани и во наредниот период. Но мора да нагласам дека како општество мора да работиме и на сајбер безбедноста и на сајбер отпорноста. Процеси кои мора да ги реализираме паралелно со процесот на дигитална трансформација на општеството. Последните безбедносни предизвици со кои се соочува Европа, но и светот, покажуваат колку е важно да градиме сајбер безбедно и сајбер одговорно општество. Последните геополитички активности, агресијата врз Украина, ја подигна потребата за заеднички активности и акции во областа на сајбер безбедноста. На сајбер безбедноста не смееме да гледаме како на трошок, туку како на инвестиција која од една страна ја штити нашата држава и нашите граѓани од надворешни напади, но од друга страна овозможува и јакнење на довербата на граѓаните во институциите во системот. И токму затоа ми представува особено задоволство да ви информирам дека по претходно преземена иницијатива од страна на мојот кабинет, Северна Македонија стана 103-та членка на Global Forum on Cyber Expertise, во која членуваат и соработуваат владите на најразвинените земји во светот на темата на сајбер безбедност, организации како ОПСЕ, Светска банка, Обединените нации, Европската унија, Совет на Европа, Интерпол и многу други, како и стопански комори и приватни компании кои работат на оваа тема. Владата на Република Северна Македонија со сите министерства и институции кои се посветени на оваа област во рамките на овој форум ќе работи на 4 теми: политики и стратегии, менеджмент на инциденти и заштита на инфраструктурата од сајбер напади, сајбер криминал, сајбер култура и градење на капацитети. Истовремено, наредната недела во соработка со e-Governance Academy, организација од Естонија, која ги помага процесите на дигитална трансформација во повеќе држави, ќе организираме Strategic Cyber Security Table Top Expertise, e-Society, на кои ќе присуствуваат представници од речиси сите министерства во владата и владини агенции кои имаат надлежност во делот на сајбер безбедноста. Целта на оваа симулацијска вежба за сајбер безбедност е подигање на свеста за сајбер заканите кај високото раководство на институциите, развивање на вештини за управување со сајбер кризи, увид во организацијската поставеност при донесување на одлуки при вонредна состојба, информирање за стратегиите и акцијските планови за справување на ризици. Исто така, оваа симулацијска вежба треба да овозможи подобар одговор на владините институции на евентуални сајбер напади, закана која станува се пореална и во нашето општество за жал, а воедно и да се обучат носителите на одлуки при вакви напади. Сајбер безбедноста е клучен елемент во одбраната на секоја држава и од исклучително значење за Република Северна Македонија е зајакнување на сајбер безбедноста и сајбер отпорноста. И заедно со меѓународните партнери ќе продолжиме силно да работиме и да се развиваме и на оваа тема, за да ги достигнеме ЕУ стандардите на сајбер безбедно општество, штитејќи ги граѓаните и државните системи од сајбер напади. Ние имаме обврска да изградиме доверба кај граѓаните во дигиталните услуги, а тоа ќе го постигнеме само ако обезбедиме сигурност и доверба дека користењето на дигиталните услуги е безбедно и дека нема да ја нарушиме приватноста на граѓаните. На крајот, сакам да нагласам дека предуслов за овој процес да успее е активна вклученост и посветеност на сите институции, на сите вработени во администрацијата. Свесна сум дека ќе има отпор, свесна сум дека некои навики тешко се напуштаат, но исто така сум свесна дека дигиталната трансформација на општеството е најдобрата алтернатива за создавање поефикасни и потранспарентни институции отпорни на корупција. Ви посакувам успешна и продуктивна работа. Ви благодарам.
We actually plan for the Minister of Defense of the Republic of North Macedonia, Ms. Slavianka Petrovska, to come and give her opening remarks. However, she was unable to attend. Nevertheless, here with us today, we have the State Secretary of the Minister of Defense of the Republic of North Macedonia, Mr. Vladimir Ančev, to give us his opening remarks. Повелете.
Благодарам. Прво ще еднаш да се извинам в име на министърката Славянка Петровска, дека во последен момент не можеше да присуствува. Почитувани екселенции, амбасадори, присутни, дами и господа. Најпрво благодарност до амбасадорите кои што во своите излагања кажат доста детали, интересни работи кои што без да ги чуеме и видиме вака на хартија ни се вчудоневидувачки колку мейлови има, колку телефони, колку користиме и колку станавме зависни од современото општество и комуникациите во него. Исто така сакам да се заблагодарам на фундацијата Метаморфозис за поканата да се обратиме како Министерство за одбрана на оваа исклучително важна тема и за можноста да дискутираме за современите безбедности предизвици со кои што се соочуваме. Дигиталната трансформација станува клучна движечка сила за економскиот и општествениот развој. Само да се подсетиме каде бевме пред 30 на години, кога сите ние бевме можеби во средните училишта или на факултет, каде беше општеството и дигиталниот свет, каде е сега. Особено со почетокот на ковид пандемијата, нашето живење, нашата економија стана зависни од информацијските системи и мрежи. Пандемијата ги тестираше нашите општества на секој начин. Најпрво ги тестираше нашите интернет врски, дали се доволно стабилни и добри да можеме да одржиме онлайн настава, да одржиме онлайн состаноци и така натаму. Да работиме од дома беше промена за сите нас. Како да одржуваме контакти со семејствата и со пријателите, а пред се и над се, како да ги едуцираме нашите деца. Но дека дигитализацијата и постојаното зголемување на меѓусебната поврзаност ни овозможува ефикасност, ти исто така не прават и ранливи, особено понранливи кон сајбер операциите. Границата помеѓу физичката и дигиталната средина е замаглена, не е многу јасно што е што. Затоа растечката зависност на државата од информатичките и комуникацијските технологии ја зголемува потребата за воспоставување на функционален систем за сајбер одбрана. Бидејќи дека ние го влечеме максимумот во технологиите, да не забораваме дека спротивната страна, односно тие што сакаат да ги иницираат сајбер нападите, го прават истото. Пандемијата ни покажа дека мораме да бидеме агилни и ефикасни, за да се подготвиме во дигиталната ера во која навлегува човештвото. Сета оваа ситуација како да беше една увертира за тоа што се случи во февруари оваа година, каде што на европскиот континент повторно се соочивме со она што го сметавме дека е невозможно, да имаме конвенционална војна на тлото на Европа. Но оваа војна, да не забораваме дека не се води само на копно, по вода или во воздух. Може би, како што се спомена, во првите, амбасадорот Гир го спомена тоа, во првите напади беа и сајбер напади кои што се случија во оваа војна. Новиот хибриден начин на војување често се дефинира како пета димензија во војувањето, а сајбер просторот е онаму каде што овие битки се водат. Сериозните сајбер напади и последиците од загрозувањето на критичната инфраструктура се сериозен безбедносен предизвик за државите. Сведоци сме дека во последниот период во регионот, а и кај нас, имаме зголемен број на сајбер напади врз државните институции, невладините организации, банките, централните банки, и за жал не можеме да ги отфрлиме овие настани како еднократни или како нешто што се случило во минатото, а нема да се случи во иднина. Ова е растечки тренд и чие темпо за жал не покажува знаци на забавување. Секоја земја, така и Северна Македонија, треба да биде способна за приспособување кон непредвидливата, комплексна и променлива безбедносна реалност. Заканите доаѓаат од државни недржавни актери кои се повеќе користат механизми на така наречена мека моќ за да ги ослабнат институциите, економиите и општествата, да загрозат нивната безбедност, а со крајна цел да се истенчи, намали и обесхрабри поддршката за Украина во конкретниот случај, каде што западниот демократски свет несебично ја пружа. Свесни сме на сите хибридни напади кои што ги добива Република Северна Македонија за поддршката која што ја даваме на Украина. Земајќи го предвид дека овие современи закани имаат комплексна содржина, се наметнува и потребата на одговор на целокупното општество. Тоа подразбира градење на национални капацитети за утврдување на отпорност кон овие закани преку поширок, поинтегриран и подобро координиран пристап на национално ниво. Во таа насока, ние како влада сериозно ги сваќаме сајбер и хибридните предизвици. Националната стратегија за сајбер отпорност веќе беше напомената и во неја се дефинирани визиите за воспоставување на безбедна сигурност на дигитална средина, која што ќе биде поддржана со соодветни капацитети и средина во која што ќе имаме високо квалификувани експерти и системи кои што ќе ни овозможат заштита, но и континуирана будност и подготвеност да се делува. Секако од 2018 година, од кога е донесена оваа стратегија до денеска, нашиот свет драстично се промени, особено сајбер просторот, и мајќи предвид оваа реалност, Министерството за одбрана дефинираше приоритети за развој на сајбер одбраната. Тука сакаме да направиме разлика во дефинициите. Едно зборуваме кога зборуваме за сајбер безбедноста, а сосема друго прашање кога зборуваме за сајбер одбраната како таква. Конкретно во овој дел превземавме неколку чекори. Министерството за одбрана, првиот чекор кој го превзема е креирањето на воениот тим за одговор на сајбер просторот, кој во моментов е во фаза на развој. Ги детектираме потребните од персонал и работиме на развојот на човечките способности и вештини, и тоа преку активно наше учество како Министерство за одбрана во НАТО активности и НАТО сајбер воени вежби. Понатака ќе инвестираме во сертификација на персоналот, како и можностите за привлекување и задржување на високо квалитетните кадри од кои што имаат специфични вештини кои му се потребни на системот за одбрана, а особено на системот за сајбер одбрана. Еден дополнителен чекор во оваа насока која што го преземавме беше дел од последните измени на Законот за служба во армијата, кој што ни овозможи да имаме стипендирање на овие критични специјалности во одбраната, кој што ќе ни даде основа да го градиме овој систем на едни подолги патеки, а не да реагираме само во моментот, туку и да се опитаме да го предвидиме тоа што ќе се случува во иднина. Вториот приоритет кој што си го поставивме е креирањето на така наречен авторитет за сајбер одбрана, кој што се воспостави во Министерството, и овој авторитет има задача да развива сајбер иницијативи, да врши развој, да врши надзор врз имплементација на сите активности од овој домен кој што се на национално ниво, односно ни сите министерства, бидејќи одбраната не е секогаш само на Министерството за одбрана. Третата исклучителна и важна иницијатива е формирање на сайбер елементи во лесната пешадиска батальонска група, која што е нашата НАТО единица, со што ќе овозможиме постојана сайбер заштита на мрежите кои се поврзани со функционирањето на оваа единица. Ова ќе ни овозможи нашите воени лидери да имаат целосна оперативна слика и во сайбер просторот, со што ќе можат да ги заштитат своите единици. На самиот крај, сакам да истакнам дека во овие напори за гарантирање на безбедноста во сайбер просторот, никој не е имун, ниту државните институции, ниту невладиниот сектор, ниту приватниот сектор. И не можеме да зборуваме и да работиме засебно и паралелно. Туку треба да ги споиме нашите сиот труд од сите чинители за да обезбедиме посигурна иднина на нашето општество, особено во делот на сайбер простор. Ви благодарам.
Thank you very much. And last but not least, I would like to invite our Executive Director of Metamorphosis Foundation, Mr. Bardal Yashari, to round up the opening speeches.
Thank you, Mila. Hvala. Почитувани ексцеленции, почитуван државен секретар, почитувани колеги од невладиниот сектор, представници на медиумите, од бизнисите, добар ден и добро дојдовте на 18-то издање на e-Society, која Фондацијата Метаморфозис секогаш во ова време ја организира на теми за кои сметаме дека се важни, дека се приоритетни и кои бараат да се дискутира, за да се обидеме заедно да најдеме, да ги идентификуваме проблемите, предизвиците и да најдеме решенија и заедно да се обидеме да ги решиме. Оваа година темата на конференцијата е градењето на сайбер безбедно општество како предуслов за слободно и безбедно и сигурно, за слобода и сигурност. Темата самата се наметна како исклучително важна и сметавме дека со оваа конференција може да придонесеме заедно владиниот сектор, невладиниот сектор, бизнисите, медиумите, сите заедно да дискутираме за предизвиците поврзани со сайбер безбедноста. А како што знаеме, предизвици има многу, посебно сега. Светот многу брзо се менува, а дигитализацијата придонесува за тоа уште побрзо да се случува и дигиталните технологии прават за услугите да ги бидат поквалитетни и побрзи, меѓутоа истовремено со таа динамика на промени исто така и предизвиците и проблемите се исто така големи. А ние како држава и како регион треба да се прилагодиме, посебно затоа што ние не сме успеале старите предизвици и старите проблеми да ги решиме, а сега соочени со дигиталната трансформација, со промените во геополитичкиот контекст во регионите и во целиот свет, треба многу брзо да реагираме и да се прилагодиме и, како што рекоа и претходните говорници, да работиме заедно за да успешно се справуваме со предизвиците. А тие предизвиците се поврзани со се што се случува денеска тука кај нас и околу нас. Неодамна, например, нашиот сосед Албанија беше погодена од бран сайбер напади, насочени кон незините институции, кои имаат за цел да ја дестабилизираат земјата, со ризик од понатамошна ескалација и тие сайбер напади не престануваат, туку продолжуваат. Исто така и во Црна Гора, координирани сайбер напади ги онеспособија државните институции, па дури и банките и други критични елементи на информатичката инфраструктура во државата. И ние тука во нашата земја бевме сведоци на такви напади и сега и во минатото. И тоа што е важно е дека треба да бидеме свесни дека тие напади нема да престанат, туку ќе се случуваат постојано. За да се справиме со овие предизвици, треба да збориме за нив, да ги разбереме и заедно да се обидеме да најдеме решение. Но ние треба да ја сочуваме нашата безбедност, да ги користиме придобивките од дигиталните технологии, да просперираме во тој поглед без при тоа да создадеме технофобија, да се плашиме од технологија, туку напротив, да бидеме посвесни, да бидеме поодговорни во користењето и да се обидиме да создадеме регулаторна и институционална рамка која ќе придонесе да имаме општество каде што сите ќе се чувствуваме безбедни, без оглед на сите овие предизвици за кои што зборевме. Токму затоа, ние сметаме дека невладините организации имаат многу важна улога во оваа насока и Фондацијата Метаморфозис веќе прави напори со неколку проекти. Пред една недела во соработка со поддршка на Google почнавме проект за градење на капацитетите на невладините организации и институциите во Југоисточна Европа и во Централна Источна Европа, со поддршка на Холандската амбасада на Западниот Балкан, со нашите партнери од Косово, Србија, Црна Гора, Босна и Херцеговина и Албанија и Србија, работиме да се справуваме, да ги идентификуваме, да се справуваме со изворите на дезинформациите и да ги намалиме лошите влијанија што ги имаат врз нашите општества. Со поддршка на британската амбасада ги информираме и едуцираме младите за важни општествени теми, вклучително и сајбербезбедноста, бидејќи сметаме дека младите имаат многу важна улога сега, а и во иднина. Со Европската Унија ги ангажираме граѓаните и невладините организации од Западниот Балкан да имаат повеќе информации за тоа што се случува во развојот на дигиталната агенда, да придонесуваат и да ја обликуваат дигиталната агенда за да биде таа во нивна полза, да ги искористат бенефитите од дигиталната трансформација. Се разбира и со поддршка и на други донатори, работиме пред се на соработка помеѓу секторите, бидејќи сметаме дека овој проблем не е технолошки проблем, иако зборот сајбер на некој начин повеќе асоцира на тоа. Ова треба да излезе од тој концепт дека ова е проблем само на информатичарите, ова е безбедносен проблем и треба кој ги засека сите сектори во општеството, сите области и токму затоа, како што рече и представникот од Министерството за одбрана, треба сите заедно, и невладините организации, и државните институции, и медиумите, и бизнисите, заедно прво да ги идентификуваме, да ги разбереме и да сватиме колку се сериозни последиците од сајберзаканите што ги доживуваме секој ден. И како што реков, тие сајберзакани се на технолошки ниво, се разбира, хакирање и слично, меѓутоа и преку кампањите, дезинформацијските кампањи кои имаат за цел да создаваат страв, да ја нарушат довербата на граѓаните кон институциите и воопшто кон целиот демократски систем. И со тоа на некој начин да ги подеднакват автократските и демократските системи. И токму тука сите ние имаме дополнително улога за да ги намалиме штетните влијанија и да ги сочуваме нашите демократски вредности. Уште една улога на невладините организации, освен како едукација и сензибилизација на граѓаните, гледам во тоа да ги собере актерите заедно, улога на медиатор, фасилитатор, како што е, например, и оваа конференција, да поттикне дискусија, меѓутоа, уште поважно, да има и застапувачки активности кои ќе обликуваат политики кои ќе бидат во полза на граѓаните, а со тоа мислам да се сочува интегритетот на граѓаните и човековите права, да не се изгуби балансот помеѓу безбедноста и слободата. И сметам дека оваа конференција е мал придонес во таа насока и верувам дека ќе имаме многу интересни дискусии и дека препораките ќе придонесат нашето општество тука во Македонија, меѓутоа и во Западниот Балкан да биде поотпорно на штетните влијања на сајбернападите и кампањите за дезинформација. Ви благодарам.
I would like to thank the ambassadors, the Deputy Prime Minister in charge of good governance, our State Secretary of the Ministry of Defense, and our Executive Director on their insightful and inspiring speeches. And I would like to invite them to follow the conference from the audience. We will proceed immediately with the next session on where is the Western Balkan now when it comes to the digital agenda. Thank you very much. I'm gonna get closer to the flowers. I believe we can start. As we've all been witnesses, the digital innovation can really radically transform public service delivery, as we have seen more vividly during these times of, in the past couple of years during the pandemic. But it can also transform the democratic decision-making, the civic participation in different societal changes, and improve the well-being of the citizens while at the same time keeping their data secure. The digital transformation ensures optimization of processes, greater efficiency of the institutions, organizations, and other societal entities, also as predicted within the digital agenda that was adopted for the Western Balkans in 2019 in Sofia. In a period of political instability, economic crisis, cyber attacks, and pandemic uncertainties, the region, the Western Balkan region, has been working to uphold the principles that arise from the digital agenda and improving the citizens' lives. But to what extent? Is there political will, legislation in place, good coordination and mechanisms as preconditions to ensure safe and efficient digital transformation? And how functional, efficient, safe, user-friendly are those digital solutions already put in place? These are some of the questions that the Digital Agenda Observatory has been researching for the past 3 years, implemented by the ICETA network for increasing civic engagement in the digital agenda. Here with us today to discuss the status and progress of the digital agenda implementation in the Western Balkan countries and how to proceed with the reforms, we have our partners from the region and EU, namely Mr. Aldo Mercoci from Levizia Mjat from Albania, Predrag Topic from Bridges and Creation, DX Lab from Serbia, Ariana Giuli from Open Data Kosovo from Kosovo, Snežana Nikčević from NGO 35mm from Montenegro, and online with us, we should have Kristina Mand from e-Governance Academy Estonia, who was unable to unfortunately join us physically, but she will join us online. Without stalling any further, I would like to invite Predrag Topic, the lead researcher of the final research of the state of e-government and digital literacy in the targeted Western Balkan countries, to give us a short overview of the report, focusing a little bit more on the state of play, whether there was some progress over the past 3 years, good practices, challenges, and ways to move forward.
Thank you very much, Mila, and I would like to thank all of you for coming today to the conference, and to thank, like the Oscars, to the e-SEDA network for giving me the opportunity to work on the regional report, and to all the guys here for doing excellent national reports, which contributed to the final regional report. And of course, a special thanks to the Serbian local organization, Partner Serbia, which enabled me to work on the report itself. So without further ado, I don't know whether it will be short or a bit longer, because there's lots of things and facts that need to be covered within the report. You interrupt me if I go too far. So just a bit of a context at the beginning. You said, and the previous panel said about the adoption of the digital agenda for the Western Balkans in 2018. Shortly afterwards, there was, of course, one big event that changed everything. So COVID-19 pandemic really acted as a big, impactful event for the digital agenda implementation, and it worked, and we saw that in the reports. It worked both as an enabler and as an inhibitor of the digital agenda. So what we saw in the reports in each of our countries is that it really propelled the use of everything digital. The use of electronic services, especially within some categories that were not at all familiar with digital services, electronic services, etc. For example, the elderly. So we saw lots of senior citizens using the electronic services. On the other hand, we saw that lots of strategies, documents, project initiatives were not started or prolonged because there were other priorities for the governments during this period. Of course, we all know what happened. So that was a two-way effect of the COVID pandemic. We saw good practices, for example, with vaccines everywhere in each of the countries. Digitalization, electronic services related to the vaccines really showed what electronic services could do. But that was not, unfortunately, replicated to other areas. So that was something that's contextual and that we saw impacted the implementation of the digital agenda. What was present and what we see is looming now is the war in Ukraine, the migration of the population, and the energy crisis that will certainly have an impact on the digital agenda. So that's a bit of a context. For the current state of play and what you mentioned, what we start with in the methodology, I see the methodology focuses firstly on the political will, because that's one of the main preconditions of implementing the digital agenda. So the political will is there. It never lacked with all the countries. And what can be seen and can be compared with the baseline research. For example, I don't know if the audience is familiar with the process of e-SEDA, but we had a baseline research in 2020, which showed a certain state of things related to the digital agenda, and now we have current state. So what we saw is that in most of the countries, there were strategies, action plans, programs that were valid until 2020. So that was a risk in all of the countries. Now, the strategies are in place, and my fellow colleagues will certainly speak more about that. the strategies are in place with the adopted action plans. So I think we can safely say that we moved a bit forward there. Unfortunately, what's always lacking in this region with the strategies is the execution and implementation. So the execution and implementation of the documents, the papers, is lagging behind. So that's one area, one challenge that remains here. The coordination part, because that's a second important part of the entire methodology. The coordination, I think the countries learned that centralized approaches towards digital agenda bring more benefits. So I believe also the colleagues will mention something about that. We are seeing in each of the country, whether it's a central agency that is spearheading and leading the efforts in the area of digital agenda, or a certain ministry. So that's the approach that changed compared to the baseline research. So that's something that I would like to mention. And one of the key points that was mentioned in the panel, and that's a really important, if not the most important precondition for successfully implementing the digital agenda, is the digital literacy. So that's something that is really needed in order for the digital agenda to really be implemented across the board in a comprehensive way. And what's happening there is in the baseline research, only two countries, North Macedonia and Serbia, had some kind of a measurement and tracking of digital literacy. And it's not related to digital skills as a whole, but to computer literacy and ICT literacy. And what we are seeing within the whole region now is there is still not a uniform and a standard way of measuring digital skills wherever we look at. So whether it's whichever of the 5 countries here. So that's something that's needed as a recommendation and as an area of focus in the further period. Now, I would like to speak a bit more about the progress, and I will put some numbers. So if I'm boring you, just raise your hand. But I think it's a really important thing because what they say, what can be measured isn't done. So the most important thing, I think we're forgetting from the entire methodologies, parts of the reports, et cetera. For me, the most important indicator of whether digital agenda is implemented and successful or not is the number of users of the electronic services, for example. And that varied between the countries throughout these 3 years. And I will read the numbers, and it really is diverse from country to country. But Albania, and Aldo will definitely support me here, and I was in Tirana a couple of months ago, Albania went fully online. So all the services, public services, are only available only available online, and they have over 90% of registered users, 90% of the population, which is registered on the national e-services portal. So that's something that's a good indicator whether the digital agenda is implemented or not. The quality of that and the people really using the services, whether it's they are taking someone to replace them or the agencies, et cetera, that's another question. But that's an indicator that's very important. Kosovo has 37% of the population registered on the national portal. Montenegro, 13%. North Macedonia, 4%, but that's growing compared to 2021 when it was 2%. Serbia is somewhere around 15–20%. So still lots of room there for improvement. And for me, that's one of the key indicators whether a country is successful in implementing digital agenda or not. For the next set of numbers, let's say, there are 2 important indexes, let's say, which measure the e-government state of things in the countries. So one is the UN e-government survey. The other is the EU e-government benchmark. So according to their surveys and reports that came out this year, a couple of months ago, according to the UN e-government survey, and that's a good indicator because the first in the baseline research was done in 2020, and the latest one came out in 2022. So there are mixed results for the region within these reports. Montenegro increased or improved its position by 4 positions in the ranks. Serbia increased and improved its position by 18 places. So that's a huge leap for Serbia here. Albania and North Macedonia went down 4 and 8 places in the ranks, but didn't change much. There was a moderate increase or moderate decrease in the e-government index itself. And what was interesting for me here is the source of the improvement in the positions of the UN benchmark. And the main source of improvement was telecommunication infrastructure. So it's an infrastructural thing. It's not something that we covered as a focus throughout our report. So we really wanted to focus on user centricity, really making it easy for an ordinary citizen to benefit from the digital agenda. The telecommunication infrastructure is something in the back. So that's something that the countries did. What was a negative impact of the results in the UN e-government survey was e-participation. And that's something that we all wanted to increase and wanted to improve throughout the ICEDA project. But that's something that was registered as a let's say, fairly significant minus or a negative thing that the countries didn't pay attention to. Yes. So that's something that really needs to be worked on in the future. The same, more or less the same things are shown in the EU e-government benchmark, with the category of transparency really worsening in the latest report. So that's something that I think all of us in the room, the entire region, need to work on if we want to improve the digital agenda and the benefits that the ordinary citizens are feeling from that. And if I need to emphasize one more thing, and we covered that on our conference in Tirana, is really the communication part of the digital agenda, everything else related to it, to the ordinary citizen. So I think still the ordinary citizen is fairly confused with everything that we're speaking about here, and they all want to, have a simplified user interface and to finish everything related to their ordinary lives in a quick, easy, successful manner. So that's something that I think all the countries need to work on in the next couple of years, because this is a really long-term process. To conclude, there is a progress, but there is let's say, a mild, stable, safe progress in the previous 3 years. But there are some really good indicators and practices that we shown in the report. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Predrag. On your insights, it was interesting to hear actually how far we have or haven't come with the reforms, taking into consideration our local context. I must say that when it comes to North Macedonia, but also the region, in the past 3 years, we've had both parliamentary and local elections, which have quite significantly been detrimental to stalling certain processes and progress in the majority of the areas. But of course, the civic sector was here to facilitate a smoother digital transformation when it comes to advocacy, assisting citizens in using e-services, increasing their awareness and digital literacy, supporting institutions with new useful digital tools that can ease in their work and public service delivery, providing opportunities for synergies and knowledge exchange, one of which is also this conference. But also the media, who were also responsible for elevating the crucial issues related to digitalization in the public discourse, and in that way advocating for a change. Coming back to our partners from the region, I would like to ask them shortly to comment on the findings from the research from their own country perspective. Perhaps we can start with Snežana Nikčević. Montenegro had his first digital transformation strategy last year, if I recall well.
Hello, everyone from my side, and also thank you guys for inviting us to participate in the conference. Like Montenegro, as Peja already explained, actually has a pretty good legislative framework, and as Mila already explained, we had a first digital transformation strategy adopted last year. But on the other hand, we do not have many activities from that digital transformation strategy implemented due to recent cyber attacks as well, but also like a big political crisis our country is currently in. But I would like to actually come back to the e-Society project and the things we've done. And since I've been heavily involved in the research, one of the things and one of the recommendations that were throughout all 3 country reports that we had is that on one side, the perception of digital transformation among public servants as well as the citizens is the key issue, because public servants themselves do not quite understand what involves digital transformation as a societal process, because technology only facilitates the process. It's like a behavioral change, it's the change of the way we think, we do things, and like technology is already a part of our daily lives, so we are not supposed to communicate it as something separate or different. Also, when it comes to e-services, there was a really low level of people knowing about e-services as well as using them. And although we did have like some increase, it is due to the fact that, for example, you have 3 or 4 e-services that are obligatory and are all related more or less to the educational system. So, for example, you have to apply for university online or to, I don't know, get student credit online. And these are the numbers that are heavily influencing the percentages that Peja was talking about. What we've come across throughout our research as well is that we lack a lot of quality data. I mean, we have statistics and everything, but the point is to actually influence people behaviors. So when we're talking about awareness raising, it is not enough anymore to just reach people, although it is a struggle in Montenegro because we have low level of awareness, but we already skipped that step. When we have to just reach them, we have to influence their behavior as well. So it is a struggle when you also include media sector, who actually doesn't cover this topic that often. I mean, it's mostly copy paste articles that are revolved around, I don't know, some interesting facts about technology, stuff like that. Or they are about decision-making processes that are not explained actually for the people to understand how that will impact their daily lives. Because for an average citizen, it's not enough to say, okay, we have digital transformation strategy. For them, it means, okay, how it will benefit me to communicate with the government or with the institution or the local municipalities as well. And also one of the things that was mentioned is infrastructure. This was, and I think this is relevant for the whole region, the situation is quite good in all big municipalities. But when you go a little bit rural, it is really different. People are struggling even with electricity as like a basic precondition, because I mean, the internet is great, but when you do not have electricity, it's really difficult to talk about any kind of process. But also, I would like to emphasize, and I'll finish with this, when it comes to participation as well, I'm working in digital literacy. I'm working a lot on the field because we are mainly the grassroots organization. And one of the things is that people are perceiving, I mean, they have low level of trust in institutions in general. And especially since the cyber attacks happen, they're even more afraid because they're afraid for the security of their data. So on one side, we have a low level of functional literacy, and I'm sorry to say so, but this is like the last data that we've got, low level of functional literacy. We have low level of media literacy, and media literacy and digital literacy at this point of time are inseparable. So these are like all parallel processes that we have to work on as civil societies, as institutions, as representatives of all kinds of decision-making bodies, and technology actually facilitates it. But we have to communicate it consistently as a tool that facilitates all of these processes. And I think that's the key thing that we are struggling with when it comes to the perception of digital transformation, but as well as citizens' participation on all levels, especially in Montenegro. But I think it's true for the whole region. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Snežana. Ariana, coming from Kosovo, maybe you can comment. You were the last country who had the e-service e-Kosovo platform. However, the citizens are very rapidly registering it. I'm not sure if they're using it. Yeah.
I quickly want to continue on our discussion here. I want to get back to again explain what we're actually doing because Predrag gave a great overview. Before getting to that point, Mila, because it's the main, it's most of the significant outcomes out of this project and what our government in Kosovo is working regarding the digital agenda or e-government as a concept. I want to briefly mention back in 2020, when we kickstarted this project, there was a survey which we made in our home countries just to see how aware are the citizens regarding the digital agenda of the EU, which only got introduced in 2018. And the responses were just like this, that citizens were mostly aware only regarding the roaming tariffs, which were excluded at that point. And this was mainly the entire outcome that we got out of the survey. But then digital agenda as a term is really broad. It includes the internet, cybersecurity, e-government as a concept. And what our project is trying to work mostly on is in this concept of e-government to basically digitalize as most of the public services. And I'm happy to say, as Mila just mentioned, that Kosovo just in 2021 finally functionalized its centralized platform called e-Kosovo. And this was as a result of the pandemic. So we have to thank the pandemic for that, because the need for vaccination at that point served as the momentum to, in a way, bridge not only the knowledge among the people that e-services should be a must in our time, but also to help them then get introduced to other e-government concepts, which came with the strategies. I have to say, as in each country is the case, that the national strategies have been in place since many years back, before the implementation of the digital agenda for the EU. There is political will in this sense. There continues to be with the creation of the e-Kosovo platform each day. Mila mentioned that there is, considering our population, the number of services in these just 2 years. 2 years, there has been a great addition of services and citizens each time. I mean, back then I mentioned the vaccination, they were obliged to, in a way, to register and have to use the platform in order to get vaccinated, which was great. But then to continue not only to have a platform simply for vaccination, because that would have been e-vaccination, but e-Kosovo is aiming to also urge the citizens to use it for other important services. Very recently, a new service which has been added, and I think by now, today, it's fully electronic, is the registration of vehicles, which for many of our citizens is also a great help for their time, because now they don't have to rush, especially in the rural areas, they don't have to rush from the municipality to that other center to get the documents, to perhaps have a complete day off or more just to register your vehicle. And just for the mere reason, because you had to physically lose a lot of time, people would push it against the legal deadlines in order to register their cars, which I think has been the case for all. So I think for the case of improvement, we mentioned, Predrag introduced the statistics. There has been indeed progress considering the last 3 years, but there is also indeed room for improvement. Considering the progress that we've made, given the statistics, we can proudly say that we did a great job. And of course, there's room for improvement because we could have not managed to fix everything. But I guess maybe in the next time we can talk more about the part of improvement. Thank you.
Thank you, Ariana. Maybe we can move on to Albania, who digitalized everything and then it came prone to cyber attacks. Aldo, care to comment on that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think it's yeah, Albania I think is a very interesting case because it actually embedded all the positive and bad sides of or potential risks of digitalization. So basically we started the process officially, we started the process in 2013. It was left on the side tracks for many years. In 2019, it was picked up mostly because also of a hint that was during the 2018 EU summit for digitalization of the Western Balkans summit. But still also on the 2019, so on 2019, we started the process of digitalization and looking out what is the system that we're going to build, what are the main processes that or the main services that we are going to start with. And during 2019, it was basically we started implementing with some systems and with some services, but people were very reluctant to actually apply and use the system, which we call e-Albania. So basically, it's a centralized platform where all the citizens and businesses can register themselves and then apply for services. 2019, people were very reluctant, and the government didn't really know where to take this. And basically, I could say like there was during 2018, one of the figures that they were showing, it was that we had 1 million requests to the Albania services for changing the password because people were constantly forgetting their password because they didn't actually rely on the platform. Then, as we know, history goes on for the same also for us. COVID hits on, and we understood different from the other countries. We had an advantage that we had much more system in place. The problem was that people were not using it. So it was easier for us to actually push with more systems and with more services and to become more reliable for the citizens in the services that the government was serving for citizens and for businesses. So what happens is that we quickly in 2020, what we did is that we're basically swapped from some 90 to 100 online services, semi-online services, actually from 2019, early 2019, to 1,200 plus online fully services. And currently we basically have very, very few services which are not being served online. And those are mostly for security services such as passport, identity card, driving license, and so on and so forth. So very, very few services. Now, what happened during the COVID-19 is that during 2020, everything was like, apart from the very, very bad side of the COVID, which everybody knows, the government had or willingly misunderstood the idea that people can actually reach out to online services. All the population, the large public can reach out to online services. They wanted to think this or they thought this, I'm not sure about this. But I know that one of the claims that we were making constantly with the government is that when they approached with the plan that we want to make everything online and stop everything which is basically physical for government services, we thought that this was too much for the moment. Through our e-Society program, we also had the opportunity to have some sub-grantees. Especially we use this opportunity to go in the rural areas of Albania and to look out how people are reacting towards this, especially post-pandemic time. So after 2020, which was the major crisis of the pandemic, and especially 2021, second part of 2021, where we decided to slowly go on the online, and in 2022 we went on the online. We found out that there was something happening in the especially in the suburb areas or other cities in Tirana of Albania, but also in Tirana. We understood that the false narrative during COVID, where everybody could get online to get a vaccine permit or to get a permit to go outside to have some groceries and stuff, was a false narrative, because during COVID, it was easier for people, neighborhoods, cousins to help each other. But then as soon as that stopped, everybody went back to their home and to their work and to their daily routine. So it was not anymore that easy to help elderly people or other people which are digitally illiterate to actually gain gain advantage from the system. And when the system was blocked from the physical side, that became a problem. And what happened is that we saw that immediately after that, there was increased pop-up shops claiming to do the services where people would go there and have to pay a fee. The whole idea of these services was to actually eliminate the queue lines, eliminate the fees, eliminate the costs, eliminate the petty corruption that was happening during the physical approach to the desk offices of the government. Instead, we just replaced this with small private businesses, internet cafes, notary shops, etc., and so on. Now, the problem is, it's not that it was just about the fact that people were paying small fees to get this. The problem is that most of the people, because they didn't know how to access, to create an account on e-Albania, they would give out their ID card to the people, and then those people from the coffee shops or internet cafes, whatever, they were registering their account. So they had their own account, their account of the other people's. Now, most of these people, they are not dangerous. They didn't have any, they are not malicious people who are thinking about how or can I get something out of it. But the problem is this was happening, and this is still happening actually to this day. Even though we have made claims to we have an agency which is called ACSI, in English is the National Agency for Information Society. Basically, those are in charge. This agency is in charge for all the online databases and services that across Albania that we have. So at the first part, it was a very beautiful history. It was a very beautiful story where everything was online, and they calculated, for example, I can show you some figures. They calculated that from 2020 to mid-2022, 990 years in queue lines were saved for citizens. 9 million euros and so on and so forth. So this part was very good, was impressive. We were trying to reach out to the government, trying to help out with the national strategy and so on and so forth. But meanwhile, one of the main concerns that we had is that security, because what we learned soon when we had a study visit in Estonia, which is like the forefront country of digitalization, and we soon understood that there is a very high risk in making everything digital if you are not really prepared in terms of cybersecurity. So we soon understand that there was two main problems which we, for some reason, not we, but actually the government, because we were actually telling the government the contrary. There were two main topics that the government wasn't willing to pay attention to because, they weren't willing to actually open up the discussion with the experts and civil society. The first one was digitally illiterate part of the population. How are we gonna make them access the services, which is imperative, especially if your idea is, which is not a totally wrong idea in principle, but in reality, to make everything online. And second of all, making and having one agency which is responsible for all the 55 databases which are interlinked together. Is this a secure option? And were we ready to actually go online and put all the information online out there? Apparently not, because what happened is that soon enough we had one of the most vicious cyber attacks in the Western Balkans. It is officially now that the attack was made by the Republic of Iran. And of course, there is a reason why Albania was spotted out among the other Balkan countries, because this didn't happen only to Albania. This happened to Macedonia. It happened to Montenegro 2 times by now. It did happen to Kosovo. Now it's happening also to Slovenia, the European Parliament, a couple of weeks, 1 week ago or something. But there is a very big distinction between Albania and Macedonia and Kosovo and Montenegro. We had everything online, while you guys are still, I have to say in this case, lucky for you, you were not as
The benefits of not digital.
exactly, being not as much online and putting as much effort as we did. Apparently, in this weird world, it paid off somehow in a weird way, right? So the idea is that we soon understand that we are now facing a major crisis because the attack went on for almost a year. they were able to retract a lot of information from our databases, because the problem is that of having these 55 databases all interacted together, it means that if you can access through one, then you can spread out your virus through all the other databases. And basically we find ourselves now that every Sunday, there is a group called, I don't remember the name now, the Albanian Fight for Democracy, something like very stupid name made from the cyber attacks guys. And every Sunday on Viber, they release different databases. But now this is serious, and this is serious for two main reasons. First of all, because they already released all the private information of citizens. So ID cards number, mobile phone numbers, registered votes, registered car plates, father's name, mother's name, date of birth, all these essential emails, all these essential privacy information of citizens, they are now out of the public. Second, the kind of information they're releasing, they're also releasing kind of sensitive information, naming, I don't know, the list of Secret Service employees, which is very dangerous, because most of those people, they are not even like, you know, Secret Service is that also has an administration, right? So, and if they are being part of if they are part of the smaller cities in Albania, that's a really dangerous thing when it comes to Albania, because of the history that we have under communism, spies, and all this kind of, you know, old black memories that it brings back to us. But also they are transmitting now also like things like Teams, you know, the Teams, the international, when you go abroad and you're registered, your passport or your ID card is registered every time you go abroad, travel abroad. And the Teams has been available from Prime Minister's Teams, which is good because it's transparency, but also to other ordinary people, which they don't need to be as accountable as the Prime Minister or public officials need to be. The other point, which is even more dangerous now, is that we as large citizens, that like ordinary citizens, we cannot make a distinguish, but we know that what they are doing. So the first information that they were releasing, it was like, you know, plain information as they took it from the databases. Now they are manipulating the databases that they have and releasing it as true information, which we know because we have been able to verify that some of these databases, they are not true, they are manipulated. But the problem is that it's very hard for the large public to actually understand and to make a distinguish between what is purely leaked information and what is transformed information. And on top of this, the problem is that the government is looking at this as too much complicated to discuss with the public. Even too much complicated and too much serious to actually debate it also with the very few actors which have I would say a significant know-how on the matter, right? And this is a very big problem because we are unable to actually access the debate. The only debate that is being made in Albania now is purely political. And when it comes to cybersecurity, we are concerned because the level of leaked information that we have so far, regardless of what is, you know, fake news from those databases, but only the level of leaked information from citizens that we have so far, it's enough to put in danger, not from these guys, but also from other, you know, malicious persons who want to either harm, either not necessarily to harm, but actually to gain something, profits from this situation. And the fact that we don't have an open discussion, this is very, not just frustrating, but it's also very, we see this as very dangerous for the moment. So we were very happy that we had 1,200 plus online fully services, but we are very equally, even more concerned how we are going to get out of this black spiral. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aldo, on this insightful sharing of an experience where everything was digitally transformed, but how proper was it? Were the precautions and safety measures considered at the beginning? That's the main question. And disinformation is definitely something that can greatly impact the state security. As I mentioned at the beginning, the civic sector, among other stakeholders, of course, has a very crucial role in this whole process of digital transformation. And at the end of the day, it is the citizens who are the final beneficiaries, whose lives should be improved through the digital transformation. As part of the e-Society initiative and network, the civic sector has made its humble contribution in advancing the digital agenda implementation and making it slightly more civic-centric, as much as our capacities could allow. From establishing 16 e-government support centers all over the Western Balkan countries, to all over, in order for them to assist citizens to further increase their digital competences, their digital literacy, their awareness, in order to assist them to more efficiently use the public key services that were already provided, but also to ask their opinion on what they think should benefit them most to be digitalized as a service. Further, through advocacy initiatives, dialogues, regional knowledge exchange meetings, study visits that we provided as an opportunity to our institutions and civic sector in Estonia this year, up to educational public raising awareness campaigns and investigative articles who actually really contributed to elevating the discussion on burning issues in these topics in the public discourse. This is all the fruit from a 40 CSO network who has really worked in the past 3 years and proceeds to advocate for a more efficient, safe, but also sustainable digital transformation. What has been the contribution of the network in your countries? And perhaps maybe you can share what is the plan on continuing this contribution in various aspects connected to the digital agenda, regardless whether it's digital literacy, public service delivery, privacy protection, cybersecurity, etc. Perhaps, Sneža, we can start with you.
Yes, of course. Just to say that in Montenegro, as a part of e-Society network, we have, apart from us as partners, we have 8 more civil society organizations who actually joined the network, and also 5 media partners, as well as 3 institutions. So this is pretty much the collaboration that we have established throughout this project. And what happened is that apart from the monitoring and digital agenda observatory part, we managed to establish 3 e-sports centers and support over 1,500 people throughout, let's say, 1.5 years, in which actually e-centers were fully functional to support people for use of e-services that are actually available within the country. We organized, and this is also connected to the part that I was talking about before, the way citizens are actually engaged, participating, and how to approach them. At first, they didn't want actually to come to the e-center because they weren't sure that if it is free, although it was said it is free, they thought it was a complicated process. But what we did, we organized all kinds of actions of support, like Zoom webinars for people who are trying to online sign in their children to the school, how to use like online scanners. And then we use that opportunity to explain, you know, this is also the e-services of the government that you can use. It's going to be easier for you to do this and that. So you have to have all kinds of approaches to make it more tangible to that person. As Aldo explained, a lot of people actually do not know how to use it. And that's the main issue, that somehow people who are like, you know, on when you're going on a higher level and constantly being among people who are familiar with the processes and how everything functions, we tend to forget how it is like on the field. And this is why I think it's really important that everybody actually works with grassroots organizations who are on the field and actually take inputs from them. Because even in schools, and that's why also digital literacy is something as media that it is advocated throughout the clubs that we've established, also through our project Club for Media, Digital and Media Literacy that we've established in 3 high schools in Montenegro. we are trying to explain like how security issues like identity theft is actually something serious, because they're all used to make like fake profiles on the social media to actually pull a prank or something, but they're not aware what kind of implications that can have in case there actually somebody steals their identity. Because now in Montenegro we have electronic ID, and like few days ago the new law on electronic document was also adopted finally, and now electronic document is actually basically there is no room more for interpretation. It is actually something that institutions and on every level are obliged to accept. So like on that sense, we were doing a lot of things throughout these 8 organizations on the field, organizing all kind of workshops, webinars, visits to schools. I don't know, actually talking with parents on what kind of services they need for their children, talking about actually testing and measuring how is their perception of the websites and the e-services that are already existent in Montenegro, especially when it's connected to the electronic ID, because the concept of EID and activating it is a bit complicated for an average person, because you have to install a lot of things. And as Aldo explained as well, and I think it well connects, we have EID, but you are supposed to have a computer and a knowledge to install programs and do a lot of things in order to activate your digital identity. I mean, for me personally, it's not complicated because I'm used to technology, so the process is quite intuitive, but taking in consideration that like, and this is the statistics from 2 years ago, around 80% of elderly people in Montenegro use TV as a first point of interaction and getting information is also a thing that should be considered, especially since we have a lot of elderly people in Montenegro. This was also an input for us to create tutorials for use of e-government services, which were actually streamed on local TV stations. So they can actually reach, and it's like step by step, because sometimes it is not enough to say, okay, here is, you know, the thing, this is the website, you go and you will know the rest. Basically, people need that kind of certainty that they are following everything that you do, especially if it is their first time doing it. So pretty much what I would like to say is that on our plans for continuing it, that the network is actually functioning quite well. Somehow we managed to establish good connections among ourselves and within the region as well. I mean, we are all having these joint actions and cooperations. And in the following period, we are hoping to continue doing the Digital Agenda Observatory as well, but also mostly the effort is on doing a lot of work on the field throughout informal education related to the digital and media literacy, because as I already explained, I think it is really important to go directly into schools, directly talking with children on one hand, but also the work of the ITSEDA, and this is now on a more decision-making level. Before ITSEDA started, we didn't have any organization, more or less, and this is also stated in the baseline research, that are actually involved in decision-making processes. And now we've been a part of Digital Transformation Strategy Working Group. We've been a part, and we are a part of Open Data Council, of OGP process as well. So there are more and more organizations of civil society, at least the ones that are within the network, but also the other ones who recognized the dangers, but also the benefits of tackling digital transformation processes and how it can actually help transparency and rule of law in the country.
Thank you very much, Snezhana. And we will continue with the country specifics. But first, we have Christina Mand coming to us live from Tallinn, Estonia. In all of these efforts, the network has been supported by our esteemed Estonian partner, E-Governance Academy, or short EGA, a nonprofit think tank and consultancy organization that creates and transfers knowledge and best practices in e-governance, e-democracy, and cybersecurity. With us online, hopefully soon, because I do not. Okay, hello, Christina. We have Christina Mand, a senior expert on e-democracy, to give us her expert perspective on the Western Balkan progress in this area, and perhaps give us share some advice on ways to move forward.
Okay, well, nice to see you. And I'm a bit sorry that I'm not there, but we have a perfect snowstorm here in Tallinn, so probably flying out would also have been relatively impossible. But thanks to the digital solutions and to the era we live in, this is quite okay to also do it online. I listened to all of you very carefully, and of course we have been working together also very closely in the last 3 years. And I have to say that I think the process and the progress that the ICETA partners in the Western Balkans have done is amazing. And this is a sentiment not just articulated by me, but also by my colleagues in the Governance Academy who work quite closely with different public sector and non-profit organizations in your countries. In addition to ICETA, we also just recently did a cybersecurity identification and formulation study on the Western Balkans, which pretty much says the same things that all of you have just said. But I made 8 points. So 8 points, yeah. So I'm gonna go through them. Don't worry, it's not gonna take hours. I can also speak quite shortly. So I'll do my best and say what I have noticed in the last 2.5 years and some of perhaps the lessons learned that I would like to share. The first thing was that I think it's amazing that all the partners and the organizations in the network have really come to understand that digital is not a separate issue. It shouldn't be a separate agenda or a separate service or a separate policy. It should be part of everything we do. So if we design a foreign policy for any country, how we do it digitally should be part of it. If we design a service, we don't design a digital service, we design a service and it's delivered either physically or digitally. So I think this is the concept that all the partners have realized very, very well. Number 2 is this understanding of cyber hygiene or cybersecurity, which also Bardil mentioned in the previous panel. And there is a very clear understanding, I think, in your countries and amongst you as well, that digital society and digital services cannot really exist without a solid cybersecurity framework, whether we talk about political commitment or law or resources or skill building, but that's there. And what Aldo was saying before, what happened in Albania is a very good example of that, because this is a question of cyber hygiene, cybersecurity. Number 3 is something that's very close to my heart, and what I've seen in the last 2.5 years, and that also Mila mentioned in her intervention, is this growing understanding of general engagement culture. Citizen engagement is not something new. However, in these last years, something really important has happened because of the rise of innovation in technology. So we can now engage with each other. We can engage with the public sector, with the local government or national government or international organizations. And there is a potential to facilitate this really healthy discussion and interaction between citizens, between organizations, and between the public sector. So in short, there has been this increasing demand by citizens and civil society organizations to have a greater say in public decision making, and a desire also among many governments to be more inclusive and responsive to citizens' needs, which we could also witness, for example, by the North Macedonian Minister of Administration, who also visited in Estonia in May. What is really lacking and what should be there is also something that Predrag mentioned, is this stability and political commitment followed by actual delivery. Because digital tools alone do not make any society or country better. What is needed is a persistent and systematic approach to citizen engagement. And if there is one thing that I really would like the ICETA project to continue and focus more, is this understanding of systematic approach and delivery of citizen engagement, social innovation, and digital tools, to move away from sort of one-off examples and to a more embedded and inclusive system of decision making. Why? Because the citizen engagement and trust are the cornerstones of modern countries. And an inclusive society is something that can really then benefit from digitalization, because then digital serves democracy, which is something that we want. So online trust is my fourth point, and that begins with a general trust people have in each other, in the organizations, in the institutions, and in the public sector in the country, which again can be confirmed by sort of political commitment and persistency and delivery and delivery and delivery. And the last 3 points are sort of shorter, but I'd like to also mention that the importance, which I saw in ICERA project, where I think that all of you guys have done an amazing job, is this visibility and good stories, that not everything is bad, but the civil society organizations are doing great things. Local governments are doing great things. Businesses are doing great things. Let's share those stories, and let's also communicate immediately when something goes wrong. Let's not hide it. Let's say right away that, okay, we failed here, and the reasons we failed are these. What can we do to do it better next time? Then there was, and then the last 2 points are the skills and digital literacy question that all of you raised as well. I think it is super, super important, because, and there are so many good initiatives and good projects that, you know, the organizations in the ICERA network have done. We need to continue supporting them, which also means that resources and support from the public sector to the civil society organizations, without asking for dependent attitudes or non-critical attitudes towards what public sector is doing. The public sector, the public budget doesn't belong to the government. It belongs to the people of the country, and the people need to be served. And if the civil society organizations can do something better, or the public sector can do, or the private sector can do something better, then funding these funding different organizations and public-private partnerships are also a sign of mature and trusting organization. And my very last point is that whatever digital solutions we come up with, and I think that this is something that IKEDA and all of you guys have also done amazingly well, they should not create or increase digital societal divide and digital vulnerability. Whether it's a question of access, or it's a question of skills, or it's a question of awareness, but whenever you are, and that's where the role of civil society organizations is particularly important, because most likely it's the local civil society organizations who have a far better access to the folks who might be digitally vulnerable. They should be engaged, they should be heard, they should be considered, and they should be funded. And whenever a service is designed, and part of that service most likely is digital, then consider this kind of engaging design called nothing for me without me type of thing. And that's the way how we can make the digital agenda, digital innovations, and digital developments benefit the society as a whole, not only the 20% or the 13% or the 50% who currently have access or tools to do it, but the society as a whole. So these are my thoughts.
Thank you very much, Christina. I'm not sure if you heard, but you did get a round of applause. And as
I could see, I didn't hear, but I could see.
As aspiring EU members, we all have something to learn from a country such as Estonia, which is a pioneer and a leader in e-governance, but something that we definitely must have in mind is our local context. Just replicating amazing solutions does not work if they do not fit within our own local context. As we stopped to Ariana, perhaps, because
I'll be very brief.
Thank you.
So the key of the project is to address the citizens. Of course, the civic sector is highly engaged in the implementation and enhancing digital transformation. Therefore, also on top of the number of the network of organizations in Kosovo as well. There has been great willingness from partner organizations to support us and also pinpoint the gaps where their support was needed, which they were pretty creative in the sense that they sensed the creation of e-Kosovo as the platform, and they wanted to add up to that and be able to provide clear and direct instructions for the citizens on how to use the e-service. Because before we had the platform, you of course had other institutions which in a very limited sense provided some services. So that being said, also with the cooperation of our institutions, in the longevity of this process, there will continue to be, because not only our organization as ODK, but also our partners are working closely to them to continue to establish more initiatives to continue and make any deliverable functional, not only created, as Christina and everyone here mentioned, to have it digital, but is it effective? Is it actually helping the citizen? Do they have something to say for it? Okay, they do. So how do we get back their feedback? Let's do something that we reach it and we gather. So there are plans in place, and hopefully with this collaboration, this will be achieved in the near future. Thank you.
Something that Ariana actually forgot to mention is that ODK is also very much involved in supporting the institutions in becoming part of the open government initiatives as a global initiative that is one of the mechanisms where digital transformation can be tackled.
So to not take more time, but I highly believe that initiative too will enable that also our country to get a part of it, and as a region to show our great commitment in having our democracies as open and as transparent with our efforts. Thank you.
And we can round up with the efforts in Albania of the Itela network.
Yeah, I think it's there are some very simple things that we've done, and I'm amazed how big the impact was. Starting from, I remember when we were doing the first base ground research, where we were asking journalists about the digitalization process, and we were amazed by the fact that none of them knew that there was a digitalization process going on. And even better than that, it was the fact that we were able to engage them through investigative articles. So we were not only helping them understand that there is a digitalization process, that it is an important one, but we were also empowering them through these articles to actually get the hands-on together on that. First one. Second one that I really want to point out, it was also our sub-grantees through our sub-grantees. It was very important for other organizations, especially outside of Tirana, because it's always the same history. Capital city is always, it has a lot of people working on and a lot of pressure. But when it comes to outside and other cities, it's the reality is much more different. So we were very, very pleasant and to be able to help. And to empower this kind of organizations, helping with the municipalities and helping with local authorities how to actually cope with this, with the idea of digitalization process, but also in terms of cybersecurity, which is very, very big issue, not only from the attacks that come from abroad, but also from inside, right? And the third one is that we are very happy to announce that we were actually being able to, through these years, to actually change the mentality of the institutions, especially those institutions which are dealing with the digitalization process, that there is a must need to actually go and take and confront your strategies with outside actors, not just with the state actors, because the information, the input that we can give is unparalleled to what the government can, transmit among themselves. So I think these are the three main key issues which we feel very proud to have been contributed to a country where nobody knew anything about digitalization, but now everybody's talking about it. So thank you.
Thank you, Aldo. This was actually the same situation happened all over the region. At first, nobody was aware of the digital agenda, but then the pandemic was also quite a catalyst to all of these things. But we would like to think that our humble contribution as a civic sector has also made its mark. Because unfortunately we have reached the time for this session, I would like to invite you to a coffee break outside of this room until 12:40, after which we will come back here for the last panel to discuss the human rights correlated to cybersecurity in the Western Balkans. Thank you very much.
Welcome everyone at the third session of the first day of the e-Society conference with this year's focus, Cyber Resilience for Freedom and Security. My name is Mariana Jančevska, and I will be moderating the session that is called Cybersecurity and Human Rights in the Western Balkans. This session will provide an overview on existing cybersecurity capacities in relation to specific rights. The rights to privacy, freedom of expression, freedom of assembly and association, and anti-discrimination in the countries of the Western Balkans. The panelists will offer recommendations for inclusion of human rights standards in cybersecurity governance and for better implementation of cybersecurity norms within the human rights frameworks of the Western Balkan region. Today with us to join the discussion, we have practitioners, theoreticians, and academia representatives who will talk about the state of cybersecurity and the human rights in the Western Balkans. Today with us, we have Lailo Merali from the DCAF Geneva Center for Security Sector Governance that is joining us remotely. We have Alexander Ratsev from the National Center for Computer Incident Response that is part of the Agency for Electronic Communications. We have Megi Reci from the Institute for Democracy and Mediation from Albania, also joining us via Zoom. We have Svetlana Nikolovska, professor at the Faculty of Security at the University St. Clement Ohridski Bitola. And we have Hvale Vale from Association for Progressive Communication that is also present on Zoom. Without further ado, I would like to ask Lailo. DCAF covers the whole Balkan region. As part of this, it engaged 6 research teams, the Western Balkan Cybersecurity Research Networks, including the Metamorphosis Foundation, towards publishing the book Cybersecurity and Human Rights in the Western Balkans. Lailo, can you please share with us its findings?
Thank you, Mariana. Am I audible? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect, thank you. I wish to start first by thanking and congratulating the Metamorphosis Foundation for convening this very important conference. It has been a privilege to work with the Metamorphosis researchers over the past year to map the Macedonian cybersecurity terrain, in addition, as Mariana mentioned, to the researchers from the Western Balkans region more broadly. This has been implemented in the context of Western Balkan Cybersecurity Research Network. Mariana, you referred to them already. The research network has been formed and engaged as part of DCAF's ongoing project on cybersecurity good governance in the Western Balkans, which of course is based on partnerships with UK's FCDO, a valued and committed partner, and indeed the key stakeholders in the Western Balkans. Today, I'll focus on some of the main findings of this study, which is entitled Cybersecurity and Human Rights in the Western Balkans. The 6 teams have conducted empirical research, a year-long empirical research, and provided first-hand analysis. In fact, we have Maggie Ritchie with us today, and we look forward to her input on her country-specific chapter. I will reflect on the following points. First, I'll cover the why of the study. Why is it important? Simply stated, cybersecurity usually focuses on the technical aspects and on the protection of state. It's a state-centric notion. However, one part that has been underexplored and sometimes entirely absent is the human rights dimension, or the broader impact on society. Therefore, cybersecurity for all is the central concept of this research. And second, we have seen from this research the common challenges across the Western Balkans on cybersecurity, governance, and human rights. The research has been grounded in the realities of the Western Balkan economies and represented, of course, in its 6 chapters, but there are common threads that we could pull out. And finally, I will be speaking about some of the recommendations. It should be mentioned that there isn't, however, a single set of recommendations that apply across the region. Let me first start on the context of the research. There are large contextual differences in the definition of cybersecurity. As I mentioned earlier, the most common connotations with cybersecurity is the threat to critical infrastructure, essentially centered around the notion of state or national security. However, how many national cybersecurity strategies mention human rights in their text? Very few. In fact, North Macedonia being among a handful of countries that has demanded including human rights aspect in its cyber strategy. Others, of course, make broad statements that human rights apply equally online and offline. And by the way, this applies globally. This is not only specific to the region, but without the necessary and consistent state practice, specifically in relation to cybersecurity and human rights. In the research, the national cybersecurity policies of the Western Balkans are viewed, as I mentioned, through a human-centric approach and evaluated in terms of the levels of human rights protection. Essentially, it doesn't only highlight the issues that state actors face, but also the implications created for people by action or inaction. Marianne, you already mentioned the set of human rights that were analyzed. I'll recap once again. Each study went deeply into these 4 types of rights in relation to cybersecurity. The first one is cybersecurity and right to privacy. This includes the extent of breaches of data by state or non-state actors who cause the breaches, and how the stakeholders' cyber hygiene could be improved to strengthen and uphold the right to privacy. Second, cybersecurity and freedom of expression. Online censorship, disinformation, defamation are leading violations of rights and potentially leading to cyber violence. And we will see how the research illustrates that. Third, cybersecurity and freedom of peaceful assembly, and wherever applicable, of course, freedom of association. Video surveillance, facial recognition, internet shutdowns, and cyber threats are among some of these issues. And finally, cybersecurity and anti-discrimination. Sometimes cyber measures that imperil the rights have targeted certain groups of people that are already marginalized in the offline world. The overall issue, in fact, is that cybersecurity and human rights, each one of their own are very complex notions. So when we put them together, when we combine them together, of course, the complexity increases further. And the research has tried to distill and clarify these issues. Now I will move on to the challenges. I've outlined the why of the research. One key challenge is the online violence. It includes bullying, harassment, threats, stalking that are increasingly widespread. The violence is directed mainly at groups, as I mentioned earlier, that are already discriminated offline. For example, women, people of diverse gender identities and expression, minorities, and migrants. What increases this challenge, and I'd like to emphasize this, is that unlike the visible offline violence, online violence often remains unseen, unheard, unreported. And another related challenge that results from online violence is the impact on freedom of expression and assembly. Cyber mobs, we have seen from the research findings that it is in a way organized attacks and other tools are used to intimidate the people who express an ideological or political position. Next, awareness on this issue, and again, I'd like to emphasize here again that awareness in itself about this issue is a challenge in itself. Turning towards the legal system, here we see mix of issues, but a few common threads nevertheless. The issue in Kosovo has been the lack of specificity in the law on cybersecurity and human rights. And the example of Bosnia and Herzegovina, the issues are the relative complexity of these legal texts. North Macedonia, Serbia, and Albania are examples of economies with overall strong legal framework for cybersecurity and human rights, but and often align to EU or EU standards on cybersecurity, but challenges are visible when it comes to implementation, such as gaps in capacity and training. And finally, I'll note that data theft from public institution can lead, of course, to violation of human rights if the data itself, of course, falls into the wrong hands. And when it comes to recommendations, all 6 Western Balkan economies show improvements in the law and the institutional structures that link cybersecurity. So there are foundations, there are solid, promising pillars to work from. There are trends in favor of responsible digitalization. For example, the digital agenda for the Western Balkans that the EU has promoted and supported. But the question is, what can be done further for cybersecurity and human rights? The researchers have pointed towards several aspects. I'll start by noting the research team's common recommendations to make as specific as possible the inclusion of human-centric concept in cybersecurity strategies, legislations, regulations. It's about one's mindset, culture of cybersecurity, awareness towards this issue systematically, as opposed to ad hoc crisis-based reaction. Next, I'll note the research team's emphasis on necessary governance improvement. This includes more explicit mandating and capacity of law enforcement and of judicial bodies to investigate, prosecute. And prosecution, of course, serves as a deterrence factor here, given that more significant amount of violations are now taking place online. In terms of protection of digital systems and services, there's certainly the need for increased investment. It needs funds, inevitably, but with the goals of being broad, the goals are being broader than the typical state security. Turning back to data theft, for example, we see the need for more investment in cyber defense, and including in numbers and skills of people working in cybersecurity, but also retaining that talent, creating the cyber talent, but also retaining the talent, which we know is an issue globally. And the parliamentary oversight is another key aspect for improving governance. DCAF has been working in the region and raising awareness among the parliamentarians on cybersecurity governance. It is indeed an issue that affects the Western Balkans, and researchers have identified the importance of improvements in monitoring of cybersecurity and human rights by these bodies, the parliamentarians, and other independent state bodies. And to conclude, I will now just make a few closing remarks, but to recap once again what we have said so far. Definitely, we see that the evolution in the use of internet, that alongside many benefits, of course, there are some risks to human rights that follow. The first step, indeed, is to recognize the challenges. Awareness in itself is half the game. It cannot be unseen or unheard or unreported, as it is actually the case very often with online violations of human rights. The second step is taking a series of purposeful and tangible steps. Some of them are institutional and foundations, and others are more tangible, like capacity, training, cyber hygiene. Just like in many countries around the world, the Western Balkans economies are facing many challenges on cybersecurity and human rights, but they are setting the foundations in cybersecurity for all. The Western Balkan Cybersecurity Research Network has deepened our knowledge about these critical issues through conducting this year-long, deep, in-depth study. And I'd like to finally say that cybersecurity is everyone's concern. It is not only the concern of handful specific actors. I thank you for listening, and I turn back to you, Mariana.
Thank you, Lilo, for sharing with us those significant findings. I must agree with you that awareness raising about human rights and cybersecurity awareness is the first necessity, the first necessary step towards sensitizing and engaging all relevant stakeholders in building a cyber resilient environment that is mindful of human rights, and that human rights violations occurring in cyberspace should be monitored systematically and all the time to not only help access to the current situation, but also to provide a basis for further research and to allow activities to be adapted according to specific contexts and needs, as you mentioned. Now, we are moving the discussion to Alexander Atsev from the National Center for Computer Incidents Response, that is part of the Agency for Electronic Communications. Alexander, please share with us the efforts of МКД-ЦИРТ in the field of cybersecurity.
Thank you, Mariana. Dobar dan na site. Good day, everybody. Thank you for the invitation and congratulations to the organizers and to Metamorphosis for this excellent and very interesting event. So I've prepared a few slides just to go along with today's discussion. The National Center for Computer Incident Response, with short name МКД-ЦИРТ, is formed within the Agency for Electronic Communications and acts as a national point of contact in dealing with and responding to incidents in computer systems and networks in the country, and also is tasked with assessing risk of cyber threats on national level. One of the some of the activities that we or our objectives and tasks that we do in our daily work include responding to incidents, cybersecurity incidents remotely, but also on site, and also responding and coordinating to identified vulnerabilities and risks. And another objective that is tightly aligned with the topics that are being discussed during this event is actually to continuously raise awareness of the negative effects of cyber threats and of computer crime. And this is again related to the citizens. The organizations that we communicate and work with include, we are calling them our constituents, and include all the services and bodies and institutions of the government, as well as big companies from, I would say, important sectors in the country. I'm using this term because, again, what was already said during the introductory and welcoming session, today we still do not have a dedicated law when it comes to cybersecurity, and this legal framework is still not completed. And actually, there is a draft law that has been publicly available since, I believe, 2019, but this has not been adopted yet. And I really don't know what will be the future of the text or whether the Ministry for Information Society Administration will move on to another, let's say, organizational structure when it comes to the cybersecurity stakeholders and efforts in the country. One of the things that we are tasked with, and actually is part of our name, and that is as a computer incident response team, is that we respond and reply and help organizations in the country to deal with cyber incidents and cyber attacks when they happen. On this slide, you can see a short statistic of what we've identified in the first 3 quarters of this year. This is not the complete statistic, but I've tried to single out at least some of the incidents that we've identified and we've worked on with the victim organizations. Those would be incidents that are of high importance and of national importance. You can see that we've seen, for example, DDoS attacks in the country, and also website hacking and defacement, something that some of these cases were already mentioned in the previous sessions. There is a lot of phishing email campaigns in the country, much more than this number, but this number actually states those that we again identify as highly important because of the wording that is being used, we've identified that they are specifically targeting Macedonian citizens with now very good or even excellent grammar. So it's very difficult to identify between false or phishing emails and real ones. When it comes to these cybersecurity incidents, I would also like to stress the importance of, again, or lack of having dedicated legislation, meaning that all of this statistic is gathered by voluntary reporting that is being done to us, that is being reported to us. Why? Because there is still no mandatory reporting on cybersecurity incidents in the country, and this is actually one of the things that we're looking forward to when it comes to transposing the EU NIS directive into our national legislation. And we're all at MKDCERT and at the Agency for Electronic Communication looking forward to it. I must say here that we still have not adopted the first version of the NIS directive, even though EU has already published, I believe, the second version of the NIS directive. So these again are some of the issues that are that we're facing. You can also see here the ransomware cases. Again, we can all agree that the number of ransomware cases in the country is much higher than this identified four, but these four represent again cases of national or high importance and are related to government or public organizations. The thing with ransomware and something that I don't think that is getting much attention is that the goals or all the tasks when ransomware actually happens within an organization or in an individual's computer, we are all hurrying up to deal with the ransomware and to continue normal operations, but we must all be aware that ransomware is just the last phase of an attack. And in most of the cases prior to this phase, there is actually data exfiltration, which again is also important because the focus of cyber criminals has shifted not just to demand ransom in order for the victim to get their data back, but also they are stating that if the requested ransom is not paid, then they will publish certain documents that can that can influence negatively on the let's say on the reputation of the victim of the attack. So another activities that we're working on, and again, when it comes to resilience of the society or our country, we do believe, we at MKDCERT do believe that in order to have a resilient society when it comes to cybersecurity, we definitely would need to have aware and educated citizens. And we acknowledge that they are one of the most strongest pillars when it comes to building resilience in cyber. So on this slide, you see, actually in the next few slides, you will, I've singled out some of the findings from a public survey that we did in September this year and was published last month, and is related to the level of awareness, the level of knowledge among the citizens on the importance of cybersecurity. So on this slide, this survey was done on a representative sample of 1,400 in total participants. And on this slide, I do think that we can see actually let me just check. So this is about who is using antivirus software. So you can see that 57% of the participants in the survey answered yes to this. But the other part is that more than 40% do not use antivirus software for protection. We acknowledge that this large percentage also comes from the protection of our mobile devices. I don't know many people who actually have installed antivirus software on our mobile phones, on their mobile phone, even though the barrier or the border between using a single device for personal and for professional activities is non-existent. So this is one of the important findings and some of the topics and areas when it comes to cybersecurity that we think needs to be improved. So the next one is on, I believe, on using two-factor authentication. Yes, using multi-factor authentication. This is also another issue that is also tightly related with the types of reported incidents or problems that citizens are reporting to us. These are usually connected also, for example, with using social networks. Our findings states that only 1/3 of the surveyed participants said that they're using two-factor authentication, but the reality is that the other 2/3 do not. And out of those 2/3 of the of participants, nearly half don't know what actually two-factor authentication is. So this is another topic that needs, in our opinion, that needs improvement. And another topic where our efforts when it comes to increasing awareness and educating citizens can be beneficial, again, for our whole society. So this, the next slide also shows what is citizens, let's say, practice when it comes to backing up important information and data. And again, we see that almost 40% do save additional copies of their important data. But the issue is that a large number, more than 60% actually do not. Many of these people actually do, but they are even not aware. Why? Because this also includes backing up the data on our mobile phones. The point is that people do not really understand where the data that we are saving on our phone is ending up, whether it's being synchronized with the cloud service, whether it's iCloud or Google Drive or other service. And I do believe that some of the participants answered no, even though they are doing backups. And the last one slide from this statistic is actually on the source of information when it comes to cybersecurity. The first row is actually expected, and that's as a source citizens use on cybersecurity best practices and measures citizens find on the internet. But one of the findings is also that only 10% get that information from their university or from their school. So this is another point that I would like to make, and that is that we've identified that there is a need for better inclusion of cybersecurity topics and cyber hygiene measures and controls within our educational system or formal education, especially when it comes to primary and secondary education in the country. And so actually, this is the last slide. How concerned are people when it comes to their personal data online? And whether they think that their personal data that they're publishing or giving away when the access e-services is being looked after by the organization that is collecting this data in a proper manner or not. So more than half, so 57%, think that almost 60% actually of the respondents agree that their personal data is not safely kept by public services or institutions. So there needs to be, again, this is another finding that we hope will help us in our future efforts when it comes to awareness raising activities and educational activities for the citizens. As part of our activities, we are publishing a lot of educational material in the form of guidelines, video tutorials, but also last year we published a separate portal for publishing cyber educational materials. At this time we have, so this is the link, those are free online courses, and I can attest that these online courses were successfully completed by more than 800 citizens so far, totally, I mean, completely on their own will and from their own interest, without much campaigning or promotion. I would like to ask you all to share this information and to try those courses for yourselves. These courses are available in Macedonian, but also in Albanian language. So that would be it. These are the contact information for the National Center for Computer Incident Response. Please do report the incidents to us. At the end of the day, information, every reported incident can help us to get a clearer picture of what is happening in the country, what are the issues that citizens are having when it comes to using internet and online services. Also, please do visit our YouTube channel. A lot of educational short video materials also available there. And I would, as a final point, I would like to stress the importance of cooperation among all stakeholders in the country. And I just hope that in the future we will increase cooperation with Metamorphosis and especially and with the NGOs, also with the citizens, and again also with the government sector when it comes to cybersecurity.
Thank you a lot. I would just like to ask regarding the survey that you have presented. Do you have maybe online the whole report? Where can we find it?
Yes, thank you for the question. Yes, it's publicly available on our website. It's still on the front page available, but also in the documents part. So please just read it out, and I hope that you will find it helpful for further activities when it comes to awareness raising and resilience.
Thank you, Alexander. While we still have North Macedonia in focus, I would like to invite Svetlana Nikolovska from the Faculty of Security at the University of Sveti Kliment Ohridski, Bitola, to share with us the biggest cyber security risk. And while we are talking on the break, you said that your presentation will be focused on financial scams.
Се извинувам. Значи, најпрво им благодарам на организаторите кои што ме поканија да учествувам на оваа конференција. Значи, сами ме пронајдоа, дури ги прашав како дојдовте до мене, тие кажаа, па нели, ќе прогугламе на Google и ќе најдеме кој се занимава со оваа проблематика. Дефинитивно ние професорите, нели, истражуваме, објавуваме трудови, објавуваме книги и тоа било нешто поинт точка за да Метаморфозис ме пронајдат и ме поканат на оваа конференција. Со задоволство прифатив, затоа што ова е проблематика која што низ годините, може би последните 5-6 години многу повеќе се зборува, но проблематиката е многу одамна. Јас покрај тоа што сум сега професор на Факултетот за безбедност, долги години работев и во Министерството за внатрешни работи и моја прва љубов или она со што јас се занимавав низ годините, тоа беше финансискиот криминал. Но кога почнаа првите инциденти, каде што се напаѓаа компјутерските системи и се ловеа компјутерските податоци и се празнеа финансиските сметки на граѓаните, тогаш веќе беше проблемот како да се реши, кој да го реши. И едно од најчувствителните прашања, јас мислам дека ќе се сложиме сите тука. Ако некој ни брцне во джебот, ни е непријатно и ни ги загрозува нашите права. Ако некој не навреди, ни ги загрозува нашите права. Како да ги заштитиме, кој да ги заштити и како, ако тие права на некој начин ни се загрозени, како нели ние постојано слушаме и во медиумите, кој е тој што треба да ги заштити и дали може да ги заштите нашите права. Јас денеска на професор, кога ќе му дадете збор, знаете, тоа е 45 минути. Затоа си направив една кратка презентација за да не би излегла надвор од тајмингот, но и да оставам простор, нели, ако има прашање. Јас повеќе би зборувала денеска за тоа да видиме дали кај нас има компјутерски криминал, кои се облици и форми, дали ние имаме капацитети да се справуваме со овие проблеми. Значи, ние на денешната конференција слушавме информатика, зголемување, влада, општество, све. Но како да го обезбедиме она што е елементарното за обстојување на човекот? А тоа безбедноста. Дали некој може од нас нормално да живее ако не се чувствува сигурен, ако не се чувствува безбеден? Значи, тогаш е нарушено најосновното негово човеково право. Правото на слобода, на сигурност. Јас долги години, да речеме и како моите некои си почетоци на факултетот за безбедност беа да оформам или направам неколку наставни програми од областа на компјутерската безбедност, компјутерскиот криминал. И она што ми беше на почеток да им кажам на моите студенти, безбедноста е широк поим. И таа се дефинира како нешто што е рамнотежа помеѓу конструктивноста и деструктивност. Значи, ако се постави рамнотежа помеѓу тоа што е конструктивно и тоа што е деструктивно, можеме да кажеме дека имаме оптимална безбедност. Но на оваа конференција слушнавме дека информатичката технологија, развојот, придобивките, тоа е конструктивност. А која е деструктивноста? Злоупотребата на информатичката технологија. На времето јас во безбедноста сум повеќе од 30 години, значи завршив таму факултет и магистрирав и докторирав. На времето основачот на факултетот за безбедност и најстарите професори, што го викаме татко на криминалистиката, професорот Водинелич викаше: додека криминалците возат БМВ, полицајците ги бркаат со фиќо. Значи, ви зборам некаде 80-тите години. Значи, што треба? Криминалците имаат цел. Прво, кога од финансиски аспект на најлесен начин да дојдат до финансиски средства. Граѓаните имаат цел да се заштитат. А кој е тука да ја воспостави рамнотежата? Значи, кој е тука да ги заштити човековите права? Државата. Но државата ние сите ни што ја гледаме? Државата ја гледаме низ некој што ќе донесе закони и кој што ќе овозможи почитување на тие закони. Или преку законите почитување на човековите права. И тука ставив една не мисла, него извлечено образложение, уште самите Платон и Аристотел кажале дека да, функцијата на државата е да овозможи преку закон спречување на конфликти, за да може да се гарантира некоја овоземна правда. Значи, за да можат граѓаните да рачунаат на некоја правда. Сега, кога ќе збориме, една е правда, друга е правдина, затоа малку професорите на правниот факултет вика една е правда ставено во закон, а правдина како ќе го спроведеме законот. Кои се битни елементи? Посебно кога се однесува за компјутерската или сајбер безбедноста, која што е проблематика на која што денеска дискутираме. Тука се најбитни три битни аспекти. И тоа е доверливост. Зошто доверливост? каде се нашите лични податоци, каде се нашите податоци за имот, за пари, буквално за се. Од кога ќе се родиме, па и кога ќе умреме, нашиот имот кој што треба некој да го наследи, повторно е во некоја дата база на податоци. Интегритетот, многу битна работа. Кој и колку овозможува заштита на тие податоци? Достапноста. Кој се има легален, но и кој си овозможува на нелегален начин со неовластено навлегување во компјутерските системи достапност на податоците како на физичките лица, така и на правните лица. Значи не само граѓани, граѓаните и на друг начин се наоѓаат во улога на оштетени преку нивните финансиски средства на правните лица кои што нели ги имаат и со кои што работат. Самата компјутерска безбедност точно треба да се насочи кон спречување, значи како и какви мерки да се преземат за превенција, значи тука е техничка заштита, но и како со закон да нели овозможиме формална рамка за да можеме да ги заштитиме нашите права. Но од една страна е превенција, но од друга страна е репресија. Значи ние само ако превенираме, укажуваме, кажуваме, водиме политики, но ако не казнуваме, ако нема санкции, ако нема одземање на тоа што некој го сторил или нанесол штета, тогаш се паѓа во вода. Дали ќе ни веруваат граѓаните на било која институција? Дали ќе веруваат ако им ги снемало парите од сметка? Дали ќе веруваат ако со фалсификувани документи нивниот имот преминал во собственост на некој друг? Тогаш се ни паѓа во вода. Значи законот е едно на хартија, форма, ама законот треба да добие олицетворение преку лицето на правдата, преку институциите, каде што ќе бидат најден начин, модус за заштита на нивната правда. И сега, нели, како тоа се прави? Од една страна е техничката заштита, кога зборуваме за компјутерската безбедност, и тука се најразлични програми, најразлични заштити, кои што корисниците на информатичката технологија, покрај тоа што нели набавуваат, треба да обезбедат и соодветна заштита. Прво на својот компјутерски систем, а после и на корисниците, односно клиентите. Да биде појасно. Банките нели имаат своји компјутерски системи, тука се банкомати, тука се да функционира, но како тие ќе овозможат заштита на нивните клиенти од злоупотреба на нивната целокупна инфраструктура, односно целокупниот компјутерски систем. Значи фотографијата заменува 1000 зборови. Нели ние сите знаеме дека каде најбезбедни се нашите пари. Вика најбезбедни ни се во банка или дома под перница. Ако ги чуваме под перница, има опасност дека некој ќе влезе, ќе украде, ќе не ги земе. Но ако сме во банка, па долги години бевме сигурни, освен нели кога не се случи тат, ние сме држава во транзиција и се нешто ни се случува, и тука стануваме небезбедни. Но сега многу сме небезбедни и верувајте дека јас покрај тоа, нели, што се занимавам ко професор, јас сум и меѓу граѓаните. Еднаш оперативец во полиција, цел живот оперативец. Значи да ги слушнеме проблемите на граѓаните. Дали знаете колку граѓаните се жртви, масовно се жртви на финансиски измами со елементи на компјутерски измами, но каде да пријавиме? Кој ќе ни ги врати парите? Дали може некој да не обештети? Едно се бројките кои што се низ институциите, но многу е поголема темната бројка. Бидејќи малтретирањето по институциите, да пријават, па кого да пријават, па да чекаат, па да се информираат, и на крај вика, па ние, додека ги добиеме парите, дали нешто сме ги потрошиле 3 пати, бидејќи адвокати, па треба да докажуваш. Често викат, треба да докажуваш, да се најдеш како обвинет за нешто што некој ти го направил. Значи, оштетениот треба 3 пати да докажува дека е жртва, а обвинетиот или тој што го направил Он мирно ужива затоа што знае дека е безбеден, бидејќи она што јас често го кажувам, хармонизацијата на националните законодавства треба да овозможи меѓународна соработка и заштита и правна помош и соработка. Затоа што и пред неколку дена и често министерот за внатрешни работи кажува нели сега со пораките за тероризам, за подметнати бомби, и тоа е дел од компјутерската безбедност. И кажува дека тоа е долг процес на меѓународна соработка, на давање на информации, се логирале од Америка. Сето тоа е долг процес кој што треба да се докаже, ама нашите граѓани, гледате ли колку сме несигурни? Децата се несигурни во училиштата, граѓаните се несигурни во финансиските институции, а ние како држава имаме обврска да одговориме на сите нив. Значи, гледате онај полицајецот како да најде траги, како да дојде. Гледате како преку телефон, преку лаптоп заминуваат парите од сефот. Како? И кој треба тоа да ни го заштити? Сега се извинувам, нели, со користење од презентација на презентација, па тука ми се уфрлило нешто на латиница. Ние како држава, значи јас некаде 2005-2006 се соочив со првиот меѓународен случај на компјутерска измама во Македонија. Немавме кривично дело за конкретниот криминален напад. Иако имавме меѓународна конвенција ратификувана, но во нашиот кривичен законник стоеше се што е сторено, за дела сторени може да одговара само што е инкриминирано со кривичен законник. Не стоеше и со меѓународните конвенции. Сега да, тоа е коригирано. Затоа викаме, како држава, одиме чекор по чекор. Се охрабруваме. А понатаму ќе видиме и низ бројки. Значи, самата конвенција ни укажа како на држава дека треба да ставиме компјутерски кривични дела. На мојата книга Методика на истражување на компјутерски криминал ми е рецензент професорот Тупанчевски и во разговор со него вика некако се сложувавме дали е дојдено времето за информацијско казнено право. Ите како е дојдено времето. Затоа што бројни се појавните облици и форми на компјутерски криминалитет. Значи, сето тоа се напад со компјутер и над компјутер. Значи, не може да се изврши напад над компјутерски систем ако не се користат компјутерски уреди кои што вршат автоматска обработка на податоци. И сега кратко, значи, во нашиот кривичен законник, значи, за да можат институциите во чија надлежност е справување со криминалот, треба да имат формална рамка, треба да имат кривични дела. Значи, имаме типични и кривични дела кои што се извршуваат на друг начин, но во некои ставови е предвидено и преку информатички системи и напад на информатички систем. Од загрозување на сигурност, повреда на тајност, злоупотреба на лични податоци, неовластено прислушкување. Значи, ние сме држава каде што сами граѓаните видовме што се ни се случи од големото уво во 2000-та, од бомбите, колку граѓани беа прислушкувани, но сето тоа се нели повреда. Некој ми го слушнал муабетот што сме го правеле дома со сопругот. Нешто што е наше право, што е типично навлегување во нашата приватност. Повреда на авторските права. Значи, тоа е нешто што е и со меѓународни закони, и со национални закони гарантирано. Ама да знаете колку е злоупотребувано. И јас често ги карам студентите и викам, додека ги финансирате криминалците, може би вистина повеќе пари се за некој што напишал книга, но треба да знаеме да почитуваме закон. Она што е типично и што највеќе засега во најчувствителните, значи чувствително е и правото на приватност, дефинитивно. Но дали можеме ние колку да сме заштитени нашата приватност? Дали може да функционираме без ако некој ни го земе станот? Кај ќе живееме? Ќе бидеме бездомници. Ако некој ни ги стрпи парите од сметка, со што ќе живееме? Поставуваме многу сензибилни прашања. Нашиот законодавец има типични компјутерски кривични дела со кои што се опфатени повеќе криминални поведенија и врз основа на кој што нели може да се инициираат постапки, но кој ќе пријави. И многу е битна оперативната работа, што јас често им кажувам и на колегите и на студентите. Треба увото да ни биде кон народот. Значи народот е тој што има нешто да им каже на оперативците, тоа се полициски службеници, а ние имаме посебен одел за компјутерски криминал и дигитална форензика. Значи треба да се знае, да се каже, да не се молчи. И за мала штета, значи едно по едно, 101. Ако сите молчат, некој ќе се збогатува. Пред неколку години во Холандија имаше еден случај кога вработен во банка, ги заокружувал децималите, на крај кога оди во пензија, тој е еден од најбогатите. И колегите кога го виделе со јахта, се прашуваат од каде парите. Кога се спровела истрага, виделе дека сите заокружени децимали оделе на посебна сметка, чија што корисник бил тој. Она што долго време кај нас недостасуваше и правеше проблем е изработка и употреба на лажна платежна картичка. Значи со тоа заокруживме еден формален систем за да можеме да се справуваме со криминалот. И сега илустративно, значи направив посебно за оваа конференција, бидејќи нели постојано ги следиме проблематиките, за да биде видливо што кај нас се случува и дека тоа има некоја вредност. Значи не е само користена платежна картичка, но и колку со тоа некој се стекнал со финансиска противправна имотна корист. Значи направив едно кратко истражување за најтипичните финансиски кривични дела и сега ако нели јас си ги знам, ама ќе ви ги кажам кои се. Значи првото се кривични дела за цел овој период се 682. Сторители се 466, што укажува дека повторништвото е видливо. Некој подолг временски период се занимава со криминал. Ја гледате вредноста, значи тоа е во милиони денари. Но по години се разликува, зависно колку влегле во финансиски податоци и колку успеале да извлечат. 251 е оштетување и неовластено навлегување во компјутерски систем, 251 Б е компјутерска измама и гледате дека неовластено навлегување во компјутерски систем е најизвршувано. Токму неовластеното навлегување во туги сметки. Но, ако се украдат податоци и се искористат истите податоци за изработка на лажна форма со вистините содржина, тоа е 274 Б. И она што е нели најсензибилното, викаме личните податоци, загрозување на сигурност. Загрозување на сигурноста е 144 став 4, а 149 е злоупотреба на лични податоци, но имаме агенција за заштита на лични податоци и најчесто тие се справуваат, додека дојде во полиција, тие се можеби не толку, да речеме, нема толку елементи на кривично дело. Она што последниве години многу зборуваме, говорот на омраз, а кај нас тоа е се повидливо, се позастапено. Нешто што во одредени ситуации ескалира. Во една телевизиска емисија ме праша дали говорот на омраза може да предизвика и други последици. Ите како? Па ние го имавме случајот во Ѓорче Петров, кога имаше убиство, па преку Фејсбук се рашири говор на омраза, па се искрши еден куп пицерии, објекти, настана штета. Кој ќе надополни таа штета? Државата вика, ние ќе ги најдеме криминалците. Ама дали тие ќе надоместат некоја штета? Прво, дали имаат со што ќе надоместат штетата? И на крај, значи ветив дека ќе бидам кратка, треба истраги. Треба некој да ги води тие истраги. Бидејќи обезбедувањето на електронските податоци не е толку тешка работа. Но, дали знаете што е најтешко? Затоа што можеби се делува од една држава, последицата е во многу други држави и како да се сето тоа склопи за да се развие случај, да се обезбедат докази, а верувајте ми, обештетувањето е нешто што е најтешко. А бидејќи криминалците не спијат, тие шетаат, па и не треба да шетаат. Од една држава, IP адреси, користење на различни платформи, ги префрлаат парите таму каде што нема дофат силите на правдата. Или јас и перење пари е дел од мојата проблематика, викам, функционира офшор државите. Значи, точно знаат и каде да си ги заштитат нивните пари. Значи, како да се обезбедат податоци? Капацитет имаме. Значи, еве јас кажувам, капацитет имаме. Моите колеги во компјутерски криминал постојано се усовршуваат и треба. Ние на факултетите веќе развиваме програма за едукација на нашите студенти. Но она што треба, дека треба да станеме свесни и сите граѓани, не да молчиме. Затоа што молчењето на криминалците им овозможува широко делување. Ви благодарам за тоа што ме сослушавте.
Thank you, Svetlana. The presentation really opened some important dilemmas for discussion, and we will have a Q&A session at the end, especially since you raised the question of the hate speech. Now we have Maggie Recci from the Institute for Democracy and Mediation. Maggie, hi. We are eager to listen more details regarding the state of play in Albania, according to the report that you have prepared. Are there any new developments and recommendations that you can share with us?
Thank you, Mariana. I hope I am heard all right. As addressed earlier by Lalo, our study addressed the human rights issues related to cybersecurity in the Western Balkans, with a focus on right to privacy, freedom of expression, protection from discrimination, and freedom of assembly. While the overall findings were covered, I will try to briefly go over some of the findings on Albania, focusing on trends, challenges regarding to the 4 rights, as well as some recommended solutions, but also addressing some recent development as per your question. One of the most prevalent of violations identified in the research was online discrimination and violence in the form of hate speech mainly, but also bullying and harassment. These threats are mainly directed to groups that are already experiencing discrimination in the offline world, like women, ethnic minorities, LGBTI persons, people with disabilities. And cases in Albania, but also throughout the region, have shown that online violence can and has led also to physical violence as well. And this was addressed by the previous speakers too. On the other hand, human rights defenders that are working on defending the rights of the groups that I already mentioned seem to become a target themselves too, quite often, particularly women and LGBTI activists. Their private lives and reputation are attacked, and these might have a chilling effect on the exercise of freedom of speech, but also their freedom of assembly. Impunity is a common denominator for these online violence cases. They are rarely taken seriously by law enforcement agencies and rarely make it through the criminal justice system. They're often interpreted as not meeting the legal threshold or criteria set by criminal law. And this is due to several reasons: lack of awareness, lack of proper legal regulation, limited capacities of institutions. On the other hand, independent institutions such as ombudspersons, commissioners for protection from discrimination are more sensitized and accessible, but their mandates are quite limited. And as a result of all these factors, victims are discouraged from reporting. They rarely do report, actually. And yet, in other cases, when reported, many times hate speech is addressed as within the realms of freedom of expression. So there is also another issue there, and different interpretations to vogue legal regulation. With regard to freedom of speech, We have seen how emergency situations, be it COVID, but also the earthquake situation in the past few years in Albania specifically. We've seen how these emergencies have been misused at the expense of free speech, leading to centralization of public information, persecution of journalists, arrests, website shutdowns for reasons of disinformation, causing of panic or disorder. In these cases, the institutional response, surprisingly, has been swift, unlike when addressing reports of online violence against journalists, for instance, or against activists. In other cases, we've seen websites of online media across region, but also in Albania, facing cyber attacks while reporting on anti-governmental protests or in some cases during the elections. Copyright clauses as well as legal loopholes have been maliciously used to take down critical content, and other techniques such as paid commentators or automated accounts who are in a coordinated way report accounts to shut them down or even flood the social media in a strategic way, multiplying pro-governmental content and misleading public opinion. These are also noticed as patterns, and they're often called censorship through noise. With regards to privacy violations, we've witnessed massive data leakages around the region and in Albania as well, even very recently, due to misuse of or mismanagement by public authorities in many cases. Such data pose different risks. They can be misused for political gain. They can create security risks for citizens. For example, in Albania, we have had leaked personal data such as voters' data, political preferences, private information, phone numbers, license plates, salaries, driving licenses. And these further deteriorated when highly sensitive and classified information were leaked during the recent cyber attacks against the Albanian government that took place only in the past 2 to 3 months. And subject to the attack were the public service platform, government websites and communications, traveler information system, and even the state information service. Nevertheless, despite the large-scale impact of such violations, we've seen little or no accountability, and this undermines public trust overall in institutions, and in the case of Albania, questions the digitalization process, which is pushed forward rapidly, but without clearly conducting human rights risk assessment. With regards to freedom of assembly, we saw that public debate and regulation on these rights are currently lacking. So the online aspect of freedom of assembly is not regulated, and very limited data were available to us on this matter when we conducted the research. Nevertheless, we identified some forms of harassment or intimidation of activists related to exercising freedom of assembly online. The cases we identified included targeting of activists who were engaged in organizing protests. They were targeted through smear campaigns. They received coordinated reportings of their personal accounts or activism accounts used for activism. Their online activity was monitored. They were criminally prosecuted while referring to Facebook statuses that called for participation in a given protest, let's say, and also their right not to incriminate oneself was violated, since they were required to provide access to a personal account during interrogation and police by the police or prosecution. But as well, we saw some cyber attacks on independent media while reporting on protests. Nevertheless, there are some positive patterns here. There is an increase of use of social networks to mobilize or coordinate protests in the recent years, and it culminated during the pandemic for obvious reasons when we had also an online pride parade for the first time. And also some activists have indicated that they've started using safer online platforms for internal coordination purposes. These are the main findings regarding the 4 rights, but I will try to briefly go through some of the main recommendations as well. I'm sure most of them are applicable to the region, since many common challenges were identified. The first one concerns the legal framework that needs to be brought up to date to guarantee equal protection of human rights online and offline, and this includes addressing the online assemblies, as I mentioned, but also clarifying, for instance, limits between hate speech and free speech, and other gaps identified regarding the removal of online content and so on. A more human-centric approach to cybersecurity policy is needed in accordance with principles of good governance and human rights standards. Human resources and adequate technical infrastructure needs to be provided to technical agencies, but also independent institutions. Strengthened parliamentary oversight is needed, as well as the role of independent institutions to increase governmental accountability. Human rights risk assessment tools should be developed to mitigate discrimination risks and ensure evidence-based decision-making related to digitalization of public services. Transparency, and this is very relevant for the 6 countries, is needed on cyber attacks management and the measures taken to address or prevent them, as well as assessing damages and risks. These need to be made transparent. Private sector accountability needs to be increased, including here private processors of data, subcontractors of public institutions, in order to make sure that compliance with data protection safeguards is ensured. Ethical reporting and self-regulation of the media should be promoted instead of the so-called state regulation. As well as building comprehensive data collection systems for online violence cases. These are currently lacking in Albania. Statistical data are and they don't allow thorough research and due awareness in order to provide a clear picture on the state of affairs. So these systems of data needs to be built in order to properly identify areas of intervention and also do justice to the gravity of the violations that occur in cyberspace. These are pretty much the main findings and some of the recommendations, but I'm happy to take questions during the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Maggie, for your insight. This is the round of applause for you. And I can agree that the recommendations that you have shared are applicable in most of the countries from the Western Western Balkan region, because the recommendations from our chapter are pretty much the same. For example, the legislation should be updated, take into consideration the digital sphere, and to go beyond the traditional means of guaranteeing the right of to freedom and protection of personal rights and privacy. We also have Vale with us from the Association for Progressive Communication. Vale, hi. Can you share with us some information regarding the gender perspective of the cyber attacks and the necessity of including gender component in relevant cybersecurity policies?
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here with everyone, if we cannot see everyone, and with my wonderful human as Maggie, Lilo, and you over there, wonderful speakers. Gender, security. So I like the banner, it says cyber resilience for freedom and security. Question, whose freedom, whose security? Because it's really, are we all the same? So if we talk about cybersecurity, what is the history of cybersecurity or security? security in our schemes, it go back to national defense. National defense is about war, risk. There is a hyper-masculinization of those spaces. If you think about the work that the women in peace security have done through the years to try to address the issue of security as an issue that is related to humans in their diversity. And so not only the men and the women, but also peoples that have several other diversity, power or vulnerabilities or discrimination, no? Because if we talk about cybersecurity, it is really contextual. It is rooted in our cultures, in our society. And we know that our societies are not just a society. We know that in our society, not all the humans have the same access to knowledge, to power. So when we talk about cybersecurity, it's important that we know that we are moving from the physical into this online in a continuum, in a context that has the same continuum of discrimination, of sexism, of chauvinism, of patriarchy. And this is important. And I really liked the presentation, I think the one that was addressing the kind of incidents, because it is really offering us the kind of scheme. When we think about cybersecurity, we think about network and computer systems. And humans are listed as a factor. But if we look at cybersecurity from a gender perspective, a human right perspective, humans are at the center. So why, when we list those incidents, we don't have cases of online GBV, online gender-based violence? How many of us had been harassed on the internet, had been attacked because I look too fat, or not too old, too young, or not too thin, or not too intelligent? How much of those attacks are related to our bodies, the bodies of the people, how they look? How much femininity is at the core of those attacks? So a male will be attacked because it's feminine, because feminine in itself, it's a negative. And if we are too outspoken or too loud, then we will be attacked for this. So when we talk about the gender dimension, it's really going to the core of our society culture, of how we discriminated, on how we understand the bodies that walk in the room or not walk in the room. And so even if we want to stay to a binary gender, which is not my case, no? But if we go to sexuality or sexual orientation or race, you know, how much the color of our skin empower or disempower. And we know the Western Balkans has a history of structural discrimination of communities such as the Roma community, no? And so if we take the cases of ethnicity and multiply by the class the people can belong or not, the gender, the sexual orientation, how heavy it becomes. And so now if we look into the cybersecurity space, if we go into the private company, the one that design or use system to protect, if we go into the ministry, if you go in all those spaces, how many different bodies, how many different embodied experience we have? My sense is not many. And how many of us that might look different had spent time to unpack and to work on themselves and on the politics? So if we name some of the attack, non-consensual sharing of intimate images, we will see that there is a heavily disproportion of who is impacted. If we look at disinformation and we look at women's or people that are publicly visible, which kind of attack happened? It's again against the morality they might not embody because they're not good enough mother, good enough wife, So I would say that any gendered body, it's put up in the space with this impossibility of fulfill a role, but will be easily being attacked. And it's important because we know that if a male politician will be attacked, it will be probably most often attacked, except again, there is no feminization of his or their role, will be attacked because of their idea. But a feminist journal, a female feminist is my core, a female journalist, a female politician, regardless of their idea, they will be attacked because they look female. And they will attack at the core of their existence. And so if we really want to discuss cybersecurity and have gender, we really need to know that we are talking about the power. Power in the room or power outside the room. And if we want a just society, if we want the freedom and security that truly belongs to everyone, we need to have the humans in all their diversity at the center of the policy, but also at the center of the industry, at the center of the groups and the community that are elected by the people, no? Because politicians are there with a mandate. But we know that if their ideas are heavily conservative, if their ideas are entrenched into patriarchy, this will not happen. And we go back to the same issue that had been discussed, education. If we do not have education that show the cybersecurity, it's not an issue of computer and network, but is the center of the safety and security of a world where we are mediated constantly by technology. You are sitting together, but I'm sure that each of you have your mobile and you communicate with someone. So our interactions are heavily determined by the technology, and technology is not neutral, and our bodies are not neutral. Bodies of law, governance body, they are not neutral. So having a gender in cybersecurity means really to rename and explicitly say who is not being listened to, whose experience is diminished. Because again, if we have an attack, let's say in the big attack, why we think that the national security is higher important than the security of their citizens, in this case, women that report online gender-based violence, young girl and teenager, or young humans that have discovered their sexuality and they fell in love. Why their security, being the majority of the country, because each of them as a citizen is not so and high relevant as a cyber attack that is centering on computer and networks. And also, if a system is taken down, if data are appropriated, data belong to people. People have very different positionality. There are people that have reach, that have a social and economic power. But what will do people that are on social services if their data are hacked? If they cannot receive the support they are meant to be because someone can impersonify them, sorry. This is a different impact. So it's really important that we look not only at the kind of, this hierarchy of importance has to be measured against or toward the people, the actual real people that are impacted. And so it is really, really important that we understand that gender is not the usual meme of feminist or activist because we want to be everywhere. But gender, it's a minimal description of a binary. I hear people speaking.
Now done.
So,
I think it's only you.
Okay, I'll conclude my thoughts. So it's really important to understand that humans are at the center and they have not all the same power. If we want to be a just society, we need to be a society of everyone. And a democracy is there to protect the most vulnerable. And people are vulnerable not because they are not strong enough. They are vulnerable because there is a system that structurally discriminates against them and keep them under the water. So it's not the fault of the people. And we really need to change and to understand that the hierarchy of cybersecurity that think in terms of computer and networks and make humans just a factor and do not center on their experience, on their voices, on their participation, it's not a freedom and security for everyone. And I'll stop here because I know that we would like to hear a comment and question from the larger public. And thank you again for having given us this opportunity.
Thank you, Hvala Vala, for the important point and for the whole holistic approach that you have shared with us. Now, I would like to open the space for questions from the audience. And we already have one question in the Zoom section in the chat. I will read it in Macedonian since it's written in Macedonian. Прашање до почитуваната професорка. Ние имаме добра законска регулатива, но колку тоа се спроведува во пракса? Дали благата казнена политика е мотив плюс за да цвета сайбер криминалот?
Добро прашање кое што заслужува малку посложен одговор. Ако баш пред неколку дена размислував за казнената политика која што воопшто има во нашата држава, а се повеќе гласно се зборува за корупцијата во судството. Правев пред неколку години анализа на законодавствата, а посебно за сайбер криминалот, и има законодавства каде што формалните, значи законските казни кои што се предвидени во кривичниот законник се од до. Значи има голем распон од најмалата до највисоката запретена казна. Додека има држави каде што за сайбер криминал има фиксно, значи 5 години затвор. Дали земал 500 евра, 5000 евра, 5 години затвор и 300.000 евра казна. И сега ние често викаме дека стравот го чува лозието. Но нашата казнена политика, посебно за сайбер криминалот, кога нели ги анализираме запретените казни, можам да кажам дека е блага казнената политика. Но она што е највеќе обесхрабрувачко е обештетувањето на жртвите. Значи посебно кај зборувам за финансискиот компјутерски криминал, затоа што тоа е долга и сложена процедура да се најдат парите, дали се потрошени, дали не се потрошени. Граѓаните значи губат доста време, а некогаш многу повеќе трошат затоа што ќе го пријават, а што се интересираат за постапки, а за возврат нема да добијат ништо. Може би една од препораките која што треба да произлегуваат од ваквите конференции е подобрување на казнената политика во смисла на воведување и на парични казни, значи не само на затворски казни, значи и на парични казни, и она што треба да се воведува е блокирање на имотот веднаш. Значи не да се чека да се дојде до некој доказ. Американците имаат многу брзо реагирање. Значи за посебно за финансиски криминал тие блокираат прво се. Па после тоа нека докажува на кој начин го стекнал имотот. А ние прво чекаме да обезбедиме доказ, после некое време каде се парите? Па и тие што били исчезнале. Значи прашањето заслужува истражување. Значи прашањето заслужува истражување. Ние треба да се направи кај нас едно сеопфатно истражување. Какви ни се казните, каква ни е казнената политика и од една страна кои се бенефитите на криминалците? Дали криминалците се победници на законот, или жртвите се губат во законодавството? Значи тоа е нешто што треба да ја креираме, таа криминална политика кај нас. Сепак да се направи стратегија за заштита на жртвите од сайбер криминалот. Значи ние имаме стратегија за сайбер криминал, значи тоа како да се заштитиме се. Но како да ги заштитиме жртвите? Значи, еве јас, нели, го истражував овој проблем и при склучувањето на договорите за платежни картички од банките, таму најдолу има клаузула за непрописно користење е одговорен самиот клиент. Како знае некој пензионер на 80 години, значи тој да пин кодот му е залепен тука. И после вика сам си крив. Значи, треба да знаеме, ако воведуваме технологии, ако воведуваме некои добри практики, треба да знаеме и да ги заштитиме луѓето. А бидејќи сепак државата треба да биде одговорна за сите категории на граѓани, од најмали до највозраст. Еве сега, се повеќе, значи, еве ќе присутно, значи, се повеќе ќе биде присутно сайбербулинг. Малолетници, жени, без разлика кои категории. Ние додека како нели законодавство се свестиме, криминалот заминал. И сега, какви мерки, каде да ги најдеме, како да ги санкционираме? Значи, јас повеќе сакам да зборувам на факти. Значи, нешто се случува. Како ќе одговориме, но и институциите се повеќе да не зборуваме за корупција во судство, да зборуваме за одговорно судство кое што ем ќе санкционира, ем ќе конфискува.
Thank you, Professor. We have time for only one question. One more question.
Еве таму нас.
The microphone. Vesna, the microphone. We have one at the end and on first row.
Благодарам за одговорот, професорке. Да ве поздравам сите на оваа конференција, прекрасни излагања имавте. Ќе ни биде многу од корис ова што го слушнавме. Се надевам дека во практика ќе се спроведува многу почесто и дека таа блага казнена политика во иднина нема да биде причина плюс за сајберкриминалот. Благодарам.
Добар ден, Дејан Јадровски. Повеќе протоколарно прашање. После излагањето на амбасадорите и заменик министерот, имавме представници од околината наша, Косово, Црна Гора, Албанија, Србија, кои што ги разменија нивните искуства во нивните земји. Ја немаше Македонија. Не слушнавме ништо за нас. Зашто немаше такви искуства за нас? Фала.
Well, можам ова да го одговорам на македонски. Представниците на претходниот панел се дел од проектот ИЦЕДА, кој што го води Фондација Метаморфозис, и сите информации поврзани со реализацијата на проектот се достапни на нашата веб страница. А секако ние како организатори сме тука цело време, така што се што ве интересира во врска со дигиталната обсерваторија, во врска со дигиталната агенда и со активностите кои што се спроведуваат на територијата на нашата држава, слободно може да не прашате. I would like to thank all the speakers who contributed to our session and hopefully motivated the audience to investigate more regarding the cybersecurity and the human rights in the Western Balkans. And I would like to especially thank you for the speakers that joined us remotely, Lilo, Maggie, and Vale Vale. This is the last session of today, but we are continuing tomorrow at 9:30. We do have a lot of interesting sessions tomorrow as well. Tomorrow we will talk about privacy matters, surveillance and biometric data processing. We will talk about the implementation of the personal data protection law, the good practices, challenges, and future steps. And you can see the rest of the agenda for tomorrow in the agendas that you have. Now I invite you all to lunch where we can continue the discussion in a more informal setting.